Welcome everyone! By now you will have seen 3 brand new skill concepts straight from the old school team. But if you haven't, or you're watching this on YouTube, make sure to pause this video right now and check out our latest blog. We'll wait. All right, today we're sitting down with 2 of the team members directly working on the new skill, and Mod Kieran, our Associate Design Director. Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello.
To ask some questions about the new skill and get even more insight. We're super excited to get started. A big disclaimer that we want to start with is that each of the concepts that we've shared in the blog and that we're talking about today are in the very early design stages. We want to bring them to your attention to see what you think about them in their current format, see your interests, and make sure that we're going down the right path. This is a very community-focused project, so we're really interested in getting your feedback every single step of the way. With that out of the way, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us. Let's start with some general questions. How are you all doing today? Elena?
I'm doing good. Don't know what to say beyond that, to be honest. I'm excited about the new skills though. Like, we've been working on them or thinking about working on them for a long time. And, you know, we can finally see the light at the end of the tunnel. We're about to show the players what we've done. Or by now, you guys will have seen them already because this is pre-recorded. But yeah, no, excited.
I guess similar vibes. Like, it's been a lot of interesting design discussions, benefits of one skill pitch over another skill pitch, and tweaks and changes and name changes. I'm still calling some of these by names that they had earlier on in development, and I don't know. I'm excited. I guess by now I'll probably kind of know what the community thinks, but I guess that's what's currently weighing on my mind is, God, I just hope the community like them, because, I mean, a lot of it has been formed on their survey input, the discussions we've seen over the years, and I mean, I go back to what I said. This is a skill that needs to be designed for the community, by the community, and I hope that they can see that with the pictures we've come out with.
Awesome answer. Kieran, how are you feeling today?
Oh yeah, I'm doing great. And much like you two, like buzzing to see how the players react to the 3 pictures. I think overall, like, we've got 3 awesome different skills. All of them offer something quite a bit different to each other, but it's all based off the feedback the community has given us. So fingers crossed it's in a really good place, and I can't wait to see how players vote.
Right, fingers crossed that future us aren't stressing over the feedback that we're getting as you guys see this right now. Okay, so we know that only one skill is going into refinement. What happens though if in the future 2 skills are proving to be super popular within the community? Does anyone want to start with that one?
It's a tough one because obviously, like, I wanted to say we'll do both. That's not realistic at this point. We'll have to choose one to begin with. I'd be keen to, like, revisit the other one down the line, but ultimately we'll have to choose one. Depending on how tight it is, I guess we'll take, you know, the one that is winning, unless it's like exactly tied. But yeah, maybe we even like do a second round of surveys or even poll it specifically, right? This or this, but ultimately we don't want to end up in a place where we have, you know, camps of people either. I want this one, or I want this one, and I want this one so bad that you can't have this one, right? That's not what we're trying to do. We don't want to cause any strifes between people. So I think ultimately I want to encourage, like, having an open mindset to, even if your favorite isn't going to win, consider that we might actually do it again in the future.
Yeah, we don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but like, if the first skill goes well, there's a great chance we are going to do a second skill in the kind of longer distance future, right?
Yeah.
I believe we've got 3 viable skills here. I think they're all great and all work. If 2 of them are really popular, there's a good chance whichever one we don't do could be looked at again in the future.
Absolutely. I mean, I think as a team, we'd be failing our community if we just said, hey, you all really want this great idea, and even if it didn't quite make the cut, that it's never going to happen, you know?
Yeah.
And I mean, we've currently been talking internally, oh, what's your favorite? And honestly, like, I can't tell you which skill the community like the most right now. And to me, that is a big win. I said this from the get-go, that if we've designed 2 good skills and one is just, we'll put it out there and it's a fall guy, like we've failed, right? Like we really do want to have 3 viable options, and that's been a lot of what we've been working on the last weeks, months, you know, trying to make sure that we actually are delivering 3 high quality skill pitches. So yeah, I mean, we're talking about theoreticals, you know, what if this and what if that. Ultimately, we'll pick what we believe to be the most sensible, you know, what the community are voting on, and yeah, absolutely what you said. Don't think of it as closing your door on your favorite. And, you know, we know that over 80% of the community want a new skill, right? So yeah, hopefully we can just release something in the game that players are going to love at the end of the day. That's all we strive to do.
That reminds me, actually, you had a good analogy about this at some point where you said, imagine 2 people trying to fit through a door at once. It's really hard, right? Like, one of them needs to go first, and that's how I personally at least see the skill as well, that one needs to come first. That's not to say the other one won't happen, but one must go first.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's good to keep in mind this is the first new skill, not necessarily the only new skill, but we want to work closely with you guys to figure out what that should be. And thank you so much for your answers. Okay, now I want to talk about the Skill Pitches blog, which should be out by the time you guys are watching this. The community is naturally going to have a lot of questions for you. Good luck. And for me too, to answer. But players might read the blog and feel like it's a little bit vague in some areas, or that there might not be enough information. Why is that?
So I think that is kind of twofold. You could look at our last skill proposal, which was wording, which was something like 30, 40 pages, design document, exactly how the gameplay interactions are going to work, all the rewards, how they're going to work. First of all, that's just really hard to digest. And second, it's kind of setting yourself up for failure on, hey, there's a bunch of players who don't like this specific reward, and then they don't realize that version 3, version 4, version 5, this is no longer part of the skill. It's really hard to digest all those changes. Even looking at the Ruinous Prayers blog that at this time went, you know, out a few days ago or something, right? You know, players are seeing multiple revisions of it and like, oh, well, I'm hard to follow what's been added, what's removed. And that's kind of the beauty of these pitches and where we're at now, right? We've said we're at pitch level, we're going to go to refinement, and once it's refined to a point that you guys are happy to vote yes, it's going to be greenlit for development. And at the pitch stage, all we're selling in is, here's a direction, right? Here's a skill, here's a general theme, here's a list of ideas that this skill could be, and move forward. And as soon as we start saying things like, the skill will have this, and the skill will have this, and it'll interact with this skill in this way, that is literally what refinement is for. And I think that's something our players are not particularly used to with the new polling system. They're not used to seeing because our blogs are so detailed. And really it is just, everything is open for discussion and change, right? I'm sure we'll get to specifics of skills later on, but if there's something we've said that, sailing will let you become a pirate, and everyone's like, well, we don't want to be pirates. Like, cool, we won't do pirates then, you know? That's how open this is, right? Like, to the point of responding to community feedback and making sure that we develop a skill that they want for them.
It's also about time constraints, right? If we were to design all of these 3 fully, that is potentially 3 skills that won't, you know, that are fully designed, that just won't go in the game if you guys don't want any of them. I hope that's not the case. I hope you want all of them, but yeah, even if we do pick one of the 3, that is still 2 of them that does not get picked for now, right? And so we'd rather spend that time actually developing the skill rather than fully designing something that isn't going to happen.
Great answers. Kieran, did you want to add anything to that?
I think they've nailed it.
Awesome. All right. So moving on to the next question, which I'll probably have some answer for. How do we intend to poll these 3 pitches, right? Well, we've been discussing that quite a lot as a team, looking at different ways that we could use the polling system to get a really accurate representation of what players want. Essentially, what it came down to was we didn't just want to ask a question, which is your favorite, and leave it at that. We want to get everyone's opinion on each of the pitches, as well as an opinion on which is the favorite, so that we can work it out from there where we take this forward. We currently don't have a ranking system in the polling system as it stands. So we're going to be, at present, we're planning to ask 4 questions. The first would be, which is your favorite skill pitch out of the 3? And then the next 3 questions would be, how do you feel about each pitch going forward to refinement? We're going to be having an updated mod user explainer video to explain this process, which should hopefully air before this Q&A goes live to you guys. So hopefully that explains it. Not sure if you guys wanted to add anything onto that.
I think it comes down to a lot of what Elena was saying just before. Like, we want players to not necessarily be split into camps where like, I want this skill, and everyone fights, right? Like, ideally, the community would coalesce around whichever one wins. Players have told us they want a skill in that poll back in December, which was like 80% yes. Amazing, right? Players have unanimously told us a skill is what we want. So as much as people might have slightly different favorites, what we want to see out of this is which skill does the community most sort of like approve of, and we'll move forward from there.
And having separate questions really does help us get through that, right? You're not saying, sure, there's a what's your favorite question, but even just the individual ones, we can get an idea of, cool, I'm really happy with sailing, I'm really happy with taming, but maybe I'm not so happy with shamanism. And that means the poll system will allow you to reflect that, right? And feel like I've got 2 things I would be happy going to refinement, but I don't care which. Maybe you're happy with all 3 going to refinement, right? So that's kind of the level of hope, and it's not just A versus B versus C in isolation.
Awesome. Great. And yeah, just to clarify as well, only one of the skill pitches will be going through to refinement, even though we're going to be asking opinions on all 3. We will only be refining one of those skill pitches.
I think it's important to mention as well that just because something passes and goes through to refinement does not mean that it is going into the game. Refinement is our chance to really flesh it out, to really talk to the community in a more narrow, focused discussion about what do you want from this skill, what do you not want. Let's talk about training methods, rewards, specific content, etc. And now that we have this fully designed package, now let's put it through our traditional sort of poll system. Do you want this skill in the game? And obviously, if that fails, we can either look to see, was there parts of the design we need to retweak about this pitch? Do we need to go back and pick another one for refinement? All of this is just, we're trying to cover hypothetical what-ifs and situations, but do remember that this isn't saying that this vague thing that you've described that I wish I had more details about, I'm uncomfortable saying I want this in the game. That's just the first step to help us narrow our focus.
Great, thanks for clarifying that. The next question I have is, can we expect a beta for any of these skills? And if so, when?
Absolutely. If it is going through to refinement and we decide, one of the 3, we'll look to have a beta at some point. It would likely have to be, even past refinement, most likely. So we'd want to, pick one of the 3 and then narrow in on that one, get the go-ahead to start developing that one. And then we'd look to, figure out, okay, what makes sense here to figure out first? What kind of, blockers do we need to get over before we can develop the rest of the skill? One thing that comes to mind specifically is sailing, right? How does navigation work? We'd like to beta test that, to try different solutions, see what feels best, and then go with that one. So absolutely. I don't know how soon, hopefully, if we do pick one of the 3 at this point, I'd be hopeful that we could get something out this year for beta testing.
Awesome.
Awesome. I think the thing with the betas, however you want to say it.
That's probably an issue.
We don't want to ruin the excitement for a skill at the same time. So we want to get the balance right, because we do want the community's feedback on key mechanics, make sure they work nicely and you're happy with how they work. But we don't want to take away that amazing launch day that's potentially down the line where you're going to be able to experience everything for the first time, discover things properly. So that'll be the sort of things we're thinking about when it comes to what do we beta and in kind of like what way do we run that beta.
And I think touching on that point as well, a new skill it's probably one of the largest forms of content that we can release. It's bigger than a raid, it's bigger than anything we've done before. And players have always said that they want that level of excitement. The game is very discovered, it's very polled, I know all the intricacies. Going into TOA, I don't know what the bosses are and the mechanics, but I know exactly what I'm getting. this really is our chance through this to have some secrets from the players. We'll still poll things like best in slot rewards, we'll still do all this, but the amount of scope that we have to just hide things for players as they navigate through a skill and work its way to 99 through the different forms of content is really exciting. I guess that's one of the things I live for as a dev, is having these little cool, fun interactions for players to discover, and just that feeling of playing a video game and going, wow, you know, like I wasn't expecting that, or that's amazing. It's like, yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely love that about the game. And it's something we miss a lot, right? As good as the polling system is, sometimes that makes us lose some bits of the magic, because you know exactly, like you said, you know what loot you can get from TOA. So that's, you know, one part of the excitement gone. Hopefully we can bring that back with the skill. And obviously with betas, would look to not reveal too much of that magic, right? Try to keep it very focused on the things that we want to test and not open up the entire skill to beta testing.
Super exciting. Right, so I just have one final general question before we start talking about the skill pitches in a bit more detail. This one's a big one. So it's clear from community consultation, the survey, all the feedback that we've got, that the new skill has to be something special, like magical. They're really high, and some might say even impossibly high standards that we have to meet. So I just want to ask a question about how that has influenced the designs of the skill pitches. Is there a lot of pressure as well? Do you have to think outside the box when it comes to designing something new for the game?
I think it depends on the skill, really, right? I mean, I think the common joke is fire making wouldn't pass in today's game, right? You know, you can get this thing from another skill, you light it on fire, and it can help you cook food. And players, that was one of the things we focused a lot on the survey, was how do you feel about, you know, how complex skills are? Does it stand up? And I think the truth is that a traditional skill, from looking at the data, is not really going to hold up and capture the excitement of players. As you said, they want something big, they want something new, they want something exciting. So even looking at like shamanism, which is a production gathering skill, we had to think, what are these things to take it to the next level? Let's bring in things like the spirit realm, or with sailing, you know, let's have these new types of content attached to it. It really does make us want to go, it's go big or go home for a skill, right? And I think that's something that we're all like super behind, and making sure that at least this project gets like enough resources to make that happen. I think it's funny, like on Twitter, there was a bunch of people saying, I want a new skill, I just don't want it to be rubbish. And I don't want it to be rubbish either. Yeah. I don't want to release bad content. I want it to be the best thing ever. And, you know, whether that's from a self perspective of, yeah, look at that, I released this amazing thing, but also just on just people, you know, leaving comments and going, damn, I logged in, this new skill was awesome. I've lost like a month of time just like not realizing that I was having so much fun and all this stuff. Like, that's what I live for as a game dev, is just like, you know, those feelings of joy that I have playing a game, I want others to feel. So a rubbish skill launch won't accomplish that for me, you know.
Similarly, like a lot of us are players as well, right? On the team, a lot of us play the game, and I don't want to play a bad skill. I want to play a good skill.
Yeah.
Awesome. Right, so let's move on to some of the questions about the specific skill pitches. This is obviously being pre-recorded, so we're just anticipating some of the questions that you might have when you see them. For sailing, could we start with a quick overview of the sailing skill for those who may not have seen the blog yet?
Sure. So sailing was originally pitched back in 2015. I think the idea was you build a boat, and players were concerned that it was just build a boat, deconstruct a boat, build a boat. It's just construction again. There were a lot of concerns about like it being very mini-gamey, and just I will appear at an instance out at sea and deal with an encounter, and then enter a random dungeon generated maybe, and then get loot and come back. And, you know, it's just going to feel like I'm interacting with an NPC at port a lot. And that's not what this skill pitch is. I think that's one of the things with sailing that we want to like flip the notion of a lot. It's been a skill that's been highly discussed with the community, with different iterations. We've even seen the amazing plugin from Gentle Tractor and ScreteMonge with showing like, hey, here's how it could work. And our vision for sailing is really just saying, let's take all these sea tiles, all this space that we have on our world map, and make it into content. right? We want it to feel like its own biome. We want you to find creatures out at sea. We want you to see other players' ships out at sea. We want ship navigation to feel different from mainland travel. We want to fulfill the fantasy that players have said, which is I want to go to an island and discover the content that's on it. I think that in isolation is not a skill for what it's worth. I don't want you just, hey, I click a button and I'm now on an island and now I'm doing traditional content. We really want sailing to be fully integrated through the skill. And the way we expect it to go is you first need a ship. As I alluded to in the pitch, we want to leave it really open to how you get a ship, right? Whether you straight up just buy like a preset ship that like another NPC has built or built for you, or maybe you borrow a ship, so someone's like, hey, yeah, you can borrow a ship from me. Maybe I'll take a cut of the things you earn at sea, so it's, you don't need a mass amount of money to get into it. Maybe players who maybe have a good thieving level can steal a ship. I love that idea of MMOs being open to that stuff, and maybe that has repercussions, or maybe it doesn't. Play around with that. Or like, players have so many skills in our game, that they could theoretically be capable of building their own ship, right? And having that extra level of customization, saying, yeah, I trained all my skills and build it. However you want to do it, whatever style of ship you go for, you need to have a ship to sail, right? And then after that, it's what are your objectives at sea, right? It could be that you're talking to someone at port and they're like, hey, you've got a boat, I'd like to request your services. Can you go out to sea and get me this or do this for me? Maybe you've got your own objectives out at sea you want to do. And we just want to have a bunch of activities that are sailing related out at sea, right? Even if they're tying back to other skills. I mean, the idea of, what is actual proper trawler fishing look like, or deep sea fishing, and not what we've got with the fishing trawler? What does Slayer look out at sea? Everyone's had the idea of the elusive Moby Dick and sailing and finding this elusive sea monster from the depths. Or maybe it's just as simple as there's this reef out there and I'm going to go coral farming. I mean, one of the most fun ideas was, what if there's a bunch of clue scrolls out at sea, right? Players love clue scroll content, and what better than a message in a bottle with, treasure at the end of it fitting into sailing. So you'll do all these activities, and most of the XP we'd envision coming from, doing stuff for people. You've got a boat, you're sailing, you might get a bit of extra XP for like exploring or uncovering objectives. But for us, this tangled web that you're uncovering as you sail, you need to get access to deeper parts of the sea, or you need to uncover this puzzle to get a map to find an island that you can't do. Maybe not everything's visible on the world map. I've talked about a whole bunch right now about like, here are just some ideas in the sailing direction. But that is the sailing skill to us, to really make it feel like this sea ecosystem that is its own thing that stands out, and just really expanding on Gielinor, and not a mini game, not Dungeoneering 2.0, not play your own ports and all this stuff, not these systems that are sailing themed that players have maybe thought that could be a skill, because really they're not in isolation. So yeah, that's sailing as an overview. I think that it's really exciting with the level of possibilities that it could offer. And we're excited and terrified about the amount of possibilities internally, because it really is like, how deep does this rabbit hole go? But at the same time, exciting to think of it and work through it with the community.
So excited. Did you guys want to add anything?
I'm just so hyped now. Like, you hyped me up. That's an amazing skill idea.
Yes, to sailing.
Yeah, honestly.
Repitch. Couch edition.
Oh man. I kind of see it like the way you train it. It's sort of like, I don't want to say it's like agility, because agility is not very fun to train normally. You don't get XP for just running around, right? And similarly, in sailing, I don't think you should get XP just from sailing. But that's a really cool thing that you get from sailing, is the ability to travel on the sea and just see things. And then when you interact with stuff on there, that's when you get the XP, similar to agility, where you jump over an obstacle or similar, to get XP that way. I'm just excited, man. It's going to be great.
I think the biggest exciting thing about the sea is, like, when you ask like people, sailor fishermen in real life, like, oh, the sea is beautiful, alluring, but also this dangerous, terrifying entity in itself. And that's something that I guess we want to accomplish with it feeling like this living thing. You're going to have to deal with problems at sea that you might not normally expect, like random storms, dealing with currents and all this stuff. And as you said, like an agility course, players who manage to overcome the obstacles might get like token amounts of sailing XP. And then when you fully complete something, go back to port after having dealt with all this or whatever, you get like, large chunks of XP, or maybe there's side XP for doing explorer stuff. I mean, we talked about the fun idea of filling out a captain's log of charting the entire sea, right? That in itself probably couldn't make a skill, but the idea of finding all the islands and getting bonus XP because you were that. And really, I think that there's so many different entities of people out at sea, right? Pirates, sailors,
merchants,
fishermen, merchants, couriers taken from A to B. This skill should capture all of that in some form and allow you to be the type of ship owner you want to be, right? And fulfill whatever fantasy you want to do with that ship out at sea.
And it's a skill with so much potential. Like even hearing you two just talk right now, there's a laundry list of ideas, right? And obviously it's so early, we don't know exactly which ideas we might do, which way we might focus, and that's going to depend on refinement, right? But I think you're always in a good place when you're talking about a skill and it's easy to just come up with, hey, that could work, that could work, that could work, that could work. And I mean, we haven't talked about like manning your ships, what different types of ship could you build, like how customizable could your ship be? What effects will that have when you go out to sea? Maybe ships got, like you mentioned, stealing ships, tradable ships. Do we have like a boat exchange where you're selling your different kinds of ships? Like who knows? Maybe you have the Viking longboats and stuff from Relica and so on. I should say Fremenic rather than Viking, right? But there's all these different kinds of ship, and we automatically think of like the ships that you get from like Port Sarim and so on. But who knows? And who knows what's out at sea to explore? So there's all sorts of systems and ideas we could factor into this, and that means to me there's so much potential. There's a lot to work out. I think it's there's a lot of big execution questions around the tech stuff, and we might go into that in a minute as well. But yeah, really exciting skill.
I think the exciting part to me is like we have so many ideas that the challenge is going to be how do we narrow it down rather than what else can we come up with, right?
Yeah.
And that excites me to no end, honestly.
Absolutely. That's stuff we lead on the community for. We develop the things that you guys are most passionate about. We want to make sure that the skill is fleshed out enough for launch. And then any of these ideas, even if they don't make it in launch, you could just see adding sailing content going on, new monthly update. There's a bunch of new content added to sailing, right? Similar to how we do with other skills,
Will I be able to be on a boat next to like Catherley Beach while other people are fishing?
I mean, maybe.
Maybe.
Probably not a massive Port Sarim sized ship. It probably doesn't fit there. But I think that's a lot of like the discussions with tech that you've mentioned. We might be jumping the gun with questions a bit. But as far as like, are you a ship moving about? Or are you on a ship and like setting a destination? Are there different kinds of ship from like a small rowboat to like something that like a cruise ship level? Like I think these are all the sort of unknowns and questions that we have. First of all, what is possible? Because we know that we're going to be getting a lot of new features for this. But secondly, like just what the players even want, right? Before we ask what's possible, we really kind of need to say like, what do you actually want from the skill?
Awesome. Right, before we delve into the tech, I do want to ask you quickly, we touched on it a little bit, but why did we opt for sailing specifically rather than other like popular community pitches, such as exploration, for example?
Really for us, we explored the avenue of exploration a lot, and for us it really fell down with what is the core gameplay loop of exploration. And the best solution we came up with was like almost collection loggy, right? Let's explore Lumbridge and I need to go to all these places and uncover what's in Lumbridge. And then you think, what does the day one experience of a player doing that? And it's like, well, they already know Lumbridge. Are they just teleporting around a bunch and getting XP? Even if we say added a bunch of new content to discover, it's like, how much replayability does that have, right? When you think about a core gameplay loop, you want to think, I can repeatedly do this and gain XP and advance in the skill. And something branded as exploration loses value on the second visit. You already explored it, right? So I think that was one of the pitfalls that we ran into that was really hard to come up with a solution for. And I think that when we were talking about skill concepts generally, the more broad and sort of all-encompassing a skill became, the more it lost identity. Like even though exploration is, you can think of an explorer, that's a profession. If you even just go so far as our existing skills, you could say there is a production skill, and you can craft metal, you can craft leather, and you could theoretically have all of this in one skill, and it loses. Like, being specific helps a skill's identity a lot. The idea that you're a blacksmith compared to like a general craftsman compared to someone who makes potions, right? These are all very different things that all sort of accomplish the same thing in similar ways. And that was something that we really felt like we needed to go into enough of a specific where you can envision the person doing this job. You could say, I'm going to be a sailor and train sailing. And already people are thinking, cool, like you have a ship and you're at sea and you're doing things, right? And it just becomes clear from that one word of the skill what you're doing. And I could ask, say, your exploration and you're doing an explorer. Cool, I'm exploring things. Probably works as a phenomenal skill for a new MMO's launch, by the way. Like if you just had never stepped foot on Gillinor, it's probably phenomenal. That's just not the world that we live in. And we don't really, it's not really possible to create like a second Gillinor just for one skill, you know, and have.
No.
I think there's a reason sailing's captured the hearts and minds of a lot of the community. There's a reason they keep mentioning it. It's because that dream sounds awesome.
Yeah.
Like that basic dream of being at sea where you're exploring stuff you've never been able to before, I think just makes sense and is easy to understand, get your head around. And it's just exciting in the very nature of the word sailing.
And it was something that when we looked at sailing, we were like, we know this exists. We know the community's done it. We know there's been revisions of it. Let's look at all these revisions and really think there are some things that have been suggested previously that don't work, but how can we make it work? How can we fix a lot of these problems? And hopefully what we've ended up on does that. And if it hasn't, I'm sure the community will let us know.
And there was lots of other amazing ideas we've seen in the community as well.
Absolutely.
So like it has been like really inspiring to see the amount of suggestions, and I know pretty much every single one that's got any noticeable attention online, like we've read through and had a look at and said, is there anything we can take from this? Like ideas that the players have put forward here. If it's not the whole skill in of itself, or the elements we can learn from what people liked in the comments on it and so on. So it has been so valuable to see that. So even though if we haven't taken like, say, maybe like barding or whatever else that's been put forward, it has helped us. It's helped us get to where we have with these three.
One theme we saw a lot as well is that players want to explore things. And that's naturally why we kind of looked at exploration as well and went, okay, you guys want to explore. This is called exploration. What can we do here, right? For the reasons you explained, we didn't go with that. But sailing kind of offers a lot of the same exploration-y, vibe-y stuff, right? Like you can go on the sea and explore. And that's something that the player already does in-game is you go explore stuff. It's just not called a skill. It's kind of like a soft system, right, of exploring. But I think sailing kind of fits that niche, that it scratches that itch of wanting to explore a brand new area.
Yeah, exploration isn't all of sailing. It's a side part, right? That players will naturally get to, as you say, scratch that itch while they're doing it, but has an identity as a skill outside of that, which I think is really exciting.
Cool. Yeah, exploration definitely for me highlighted that players really want to explore new areas, and they also want to have some kind of presence in existing areas. And I think the sea is one of those areas in the game that you see on the map every day, and you've never really explored it before. So this is like the skill that literally makes a use out of one of the most underutilized areas of the game. Sorry.
I know we've spoken about it a lot, but just what you said there, looking at the world map and seeing it, that was actually one of the early ideas that got us the most excited about sailing was you see all this world map that doesn't have map icons because there's nothing there, and what if it did? Right? What if there were map icons at sea and you know, quest people out at sea and activities and mini games and all these things that actually made it feel like it was alive. And that sounds really cool. I think someone threw like the inverse world map, you know? Idea.
So exciting. All right. So bringing us on to the next question. We touched on this before, but this is a skill that we are repitching from 2015. Sailing started actually as an April Fool's Day joke, and then we proposed it as an actual skill in 2015. We realized that there's going to be a lot of preconceived notions about the skill. They've seen it before. Some people are absolutely sold on the concept and others not so much. How are we managing that expectation and that preconception about the skill?
I think the hardest part is for people to know what we could do in the future. And right now they'll go, cool, the old school team's left a lot of blanks. They've pitched us what is kind of solid, and we'll watch that video and we'll understand it. But they might substitute the blanks that we've left with stuff from previous pitches and then go, oh yeah, but I don't like that. And I think what all we can do is just repeatedly sort of say and ask, we're going into refinement, nothing is set in stone, and don't assume that what has been in previous pitches is going to carry forward. But also, if there were good ideas from previous pitches that the community likes, they could well be, right? We are so open on just changing literally everything with these skill pitches, aside from the identity, right? A lot of our discussions, even internally, you start talking with people and they go, cool, what about this and what about this? And they start almost instinctually just delving into refinement and going into the nitty-gritty of content. And that's a good thing. That means the pitch captured imagination and got people thinking, oh cool, what if it did this and what if it did this? And that's great. And we just wanted to say, here's the direction, and that nitty-gritty, happy to explore it with you, happy to list 20 ideas and you guys to tell us these are the 10 we want you to go with because the other 10 are rubbish. Because that's just how we come up. That's how I come up with ideas anyway. I'll pitch a bunch of ideas and a bunch of them are probably rubbish. But hopefully, like, team and community help me pick up where the good ones, you know?
They're going to tell us what's rubbish. We know.
They'll probably use more vulgar language than rubbish as well.
Yeah, we wish they would say rubbish. All right, I want to talk about one of the main criticisms that we've heard in the past about sailing. It can be quite difficult for players, especially you watching at home, to visualize how you're going to train the skill, especially before they've been able to like touch on it in a beta. So can you explain clearly the core gameplay loop of sailing and how players expect to earn XP?
Get a ship, or go to port, should we start one, get a ship, have some sort of objective of what you're doing, probably from someone at port, go do that, do a bunch of side stuff, whatever else you want to do at sea, come back, maybe not necessarily come back, we can talk about the specifics of that, but you would get XP for completing those objectives. It does sound very sort of boiled down to, cool, I've got objectives, I tick the box, I got XP, and there's probably, well, almost definitely going to be a lot of additional side things we're going to do at sea that'll help you gain XP while doing that. But it is very much, I have a ship, and that's valuable, right? Like the fact that you own a ship, just like if you own a car, someone would be, I want to pay you because you've got a car, you can do something for me. Similar to, you've got a ship, I want you to do something for me. And sometimes those objectives could be set by the player. We're very open to having that sort of natural feeling of exploration be involved. So maybe you get XP because you've literally found a treasure map and you need to figure out and discover where it goes and where the island is that it leads to. And that's almost like a side thing. You know, no one's asked you to do that, but as a player, you're like, that's interesting. And when you find it and cover it, cool, I got some XP because I managed to sail and navigate my way through the seas and get there. So I think that the specifics of the actual activities, I've given some suggestions right now, but those specific activities are what we want to figure out in refinement.
Cool. And a quick one is this is all open world, no instances?
That is correct. We don't really want to instance the entire sea and be like, cool, this is you and there's no players. One of the most fun ideas in sailing is ship customization. Have I got a small ship, a big ship? Has it got a big cargo hold or a small cargo hold but big cannons? And how big are the sails? What color are they? These are all things we want to explore and show off. And I mean, I think some of the concept art we've seen is like having like clan logos on the sails is such a cool idea. I don't know if we would go for it, but the idea that you could represent your clan and you're all in your ships and seeing each other. If it's just instanced content, it's not going to feel like an MMO's skill launch. It is literally going to feel like a mini game, and that's not something that we want to do.
Cool. Okay, so RuneScape 3 has slightly touched on sailing through having player-owned ports. Just want to ask how our pitch is different from that. Anyone can take this.
It's nothing like that. It's the simple way to say it. Player-owned ports is a mini game. You don't actively sail. You know, you set up a ship and send it on missions, and it happens in real time. We want the player to be at sea, actively sailing, and that means it's fundamentally quite different. So,
I think there are some exciting parts of player-owned ports that we could pull from it.
Yeah.
Like, while we don't like the set and forget and get XP is like, that would just be it's farming. I guess I can't say it's a terrible skill. Some people love farming, but that's not the identity of sailing that we at least want to capture. But the idea of ship customization, improving parts of your ship to improve performance, the idea of having a crew and picking the best crew for your adventure, all of that sounds really exciting. You know, if you've got a big ship, you probably can't sail it alone as a player, right? So there are definitely elements I think we can pull over.
You want to embed it in the real world as well, right? Like player run ports, you go through a portal in Ports Room and you're there. We want it to be on the real world.
Absolutely.
I really like the resource management aspect that they have in ports as well. For those of you who aren't familiar with ports, you start off with quite a small ship, and then you send it off on missions. They come back with resources that you use to upgrade the ship, and then once it's upgraded, it can go further, right? It can go to different islands further away, which have rare resources. Then when you get those, you can upgrade your ship even more, go to really distant islands and all that kind of stuff. So I really like that concept. And I've been thinking, like, how can we implement that into our sailing, right? So even if you're the one sailing, what if this island has a really rare resource and you need to go to that one to upgrade your ship so that you can pass through the storm on the other side of the map, and that takes you to an island where you can dig up a treasure, and it's exciting.
Absolutely. The amount of barriers we can put up at sea that are like completely natural and then needing specific ships or types of ship or upgrades to ships to get past them is like exciting, right? We don't envision players from level 1 being able to sail the entirety of Gillinor on a bunch of flat copy-pasted sea textures with no blocking. Our goal is to change that, and the level of ship customization and getting there, you can now travel further, you can now overcome certain obstacles, you need to man your cannons to be strong enough to take on a creature that is like sort of guarding these waters, you know, like, I don't know, there's just, again, I think players can get caught on specifics, you know, they might go, I don't like the idea that you can fight a monster with cannons. And it's like, well, cool, then we won't do that, right? But like, these are just ideas that were floating around, like, God, I hope it's
floating around.
But definitely not sinking around.
Awesome. All right. A few more questions about sailing before we move into taming. The sea is quite barren at the moment, and some players might think that it needs livening up if we were to introduce a sailing skill. So could you just briefly touch on what the tech looks like for sailing, should it proceed as a skill?
So the tech really doesn't exist at current, and that's kind of I think that's the big unknown with the project. We've looked at a lot of comparable games, you know, that have done sailing really well and seeing, cool, what do they do? What makes it feel real? I had a chat with one of our engine devs and we were going about this pitch and going, hey, how much of this is possible? Because I don't want to go out there to the players and promise things that are not. And he's like, I mean, they all seem really possible. We'll have to obviously talk about timelines, prioritize work accordingly and stuff. But we could have waves in old school RuneScape and currents and systems. We could have completely unique pathing. I mean, right now, your player can be facing one way, move one tile backwards, and they're suddenly 180 turn the other way. Might be a bit strange for a ship to do that. So maybe like you're here and you click here and the ship will take like a turning circle to get there because, you know, it needs to do that. Maybe a really big or slow ship has a longer turning circle, or a quick ship might just, you know, small turn and get there directly. We obviously want to have a bunch of blocking and stuff at sea and ways to make it feel like you're actually navigating this entity. We even talked about this. I don't know if I'm going to do this justice explaining it because I'm trying to fully wrap my head around it, but it was like, imagine if your sea could be on the overworld and you could see other people in that, but your player itself is in like a 5x7 instance at the same time that is just your ship. So not only can you see from the sort of bird's eye view your ship and control it, you could also be on your ship and go and like change the rigging or talk to an NPC or grab something from the cargo hold and do something. The idea that your players I don't know, that might be really expensive, but they were like, yeah, that's really possible. And even the engine team are going, cool, what if we did this and what if we do that? And these are things that we would want to, again, boil down in refinement with the players. These are things we'd heavily want to beta test. I think this is one of the things that we couldn't get away from this is the navigation needs to feel interesting, fun, dynamic, not annoying, not tedious, and we really do want to make it not confusing either. But like, I mean, you imagine a picture-in-picture view of having two things at the same time. Maybe that's possible, but maybe it feels weird. We won't know till we play test it, and that's one of the things that we'll need to get right. But I guess there's always this player assumption of the engine team is this mythological thing that exists and we never get access to, which is just fundamentally not wrong these days. We have a lot of dedicated old school engine devs, people who pay attention to the stuff that we do under the hood. We'll see that we get new stuff for TOA and all this. So we're going to be getting a chunk of engine time to do this and to really make this skill pop. And I think out of all the skill pitches, sailing is the one that probably needs the most, right? And that's something that the team is like fully aware of and has full backing for, yep, if you do this, you're going to need the engine time and you're going to get the engine time to make it awesome. And that's our goal with it all, to make it awesome. So.
Awesome.
We even talked about the map, right? Like how it's currently kind of small near the coast of places, but then like in between, say, Corrend and Piscatores, there's a lot of space. So what would it feel like sailing across there compared to sailing from Ardoyne to Karamja, right? Like that's a really tight gap. What could we do differently there? Could we, when you go and see, have like you teleported to a map that is like 3 times bigger? It's a copy of the regular map, but it's like huge in comparison. Maybe that makes it feel more like a sea. Maybe then you could go to Catherby, right?
Yeah.
See the people fishing. Who knows?
Yeah, the idea of finding some way to artificially make the sea feel bigger is something we absolutely want to explore, while not feeling it like you're in a weird instanced copy of the sea. It would be this, as you said, this real world copy that other players are in. Maybe when you're close to shore, you can see people at shore, but when you're further away, you can't, obviously, because you wouldn't rent them anyway. Yeah. There's a lot of things to solve. I think one of the big ones is when you look at where Krendor is in the map, this hidden mysterious island where the dragon Elvarg lives, and you need to sail so far, and it's literally like 10 tiles off of like the bottom of Asgardia. Like a player,
right there.
A player could swim there theoretically. I think those are things that we need to solve and are capable of solving. So yeah, just funny little things in our game.
A quick one, did you guys try out the plugin that you mentioned by Gentle Tractor and ScreteMonge? What did you think, if you had the chance to?
I've not tried it yet. I watched the video and I watched the in-depth talk about the video as well, which is super interesting. I agree with a lot of what they said as well. A new skill is very much, there's a difference between execution and pitch, right? Right now we're at the pitch stage, but the execution of what you can actually make really makes a big difference, and that's why they wanted to make that plugin, right? To really get you into, the boat, right? Get you feeling, get you on board, right? Make you feel what this can actually do. Because we can say a million words, but it's never going to be the same feeling as when you're actually clicking around and moving a boat, right? So that's what they set out to do, and from the feedback that I've seen, like I said, I've not tried it myself, but from the feedback I've seen, people really seem to enjoy it, and I'd really love to do something similar, right, with beta tests for sailing. I think that'd be awesome.
I think it's a good way to visualize where we were going with controlling the ship anyway, and I think that it really does, I think one of the things players have said before is, cool, I've got sailing. Is that just a new method of transportation? I've already got charters, I can already teleport everywhere, and it's like, well, yes, it's a method of transportation, but it's not necessarily from getting A to B in the fastest way. It's about being able to traverse tiles that you can't currently traverse, right? That's the transportation. So I think that plugin does a really good job of visualizing what we're trying to explain. And I think we didn't coordinate it with them at least, but it's been quite fortunate at least, I think, to help support this pitch. And hopefully players will now understand the direction that we'd like to go, even if there are specifics that I don't think I was a fan of clicking on the interface to move the ship. Click to move might feel more natural. WASD was a nice touch they added. Maybe we explore something similar. I mean, I don't know how you control this ship, but that, as you've said numerous times, beta testing, control, and navigation of the ship is #1 priority for this skill.
Cool.
Absolutely. I think click to move is probably at least my favorite. Just thinking about it, that feels intuitive, and that's what we're used to, and that would make sense on mobile as well, right? Because they don't have WASD.
Pull up the keyboard every time you need to move your ship.
Yeah, exactly.
The text to somebody, and they're like, "Why are you typing waz to me repeatedly?"
All right, I have one more question just about sailing before we move into taming, maybe 1.5. But quickly, what do you imagine the reward space for sailing to be like for players? what's in it for them?
I think the biggest thing is you start off, you have a ship, you get better at sailing, you learn how to control an even bigger ship, and that's reward space in itself. A lot of ship customization can be reward space, like as I said, either showing off your achievements or just gaining access to stuff for your ship otherwise. I think that the biggest sort of one is the amount of activities. There's new resource opportunities. Maybe there's a new secondary ingredient that can be mixed with a current herb or a new herb to make a potion that just happens to be on this rare island, or a new type of fish that could heal differently or heal more. Or it's just a way for sailing to really sort of have a method that other skills can be expanded through at the same time. It really is one of those things where sailing could be standalone. You could be a 99 sailing pure, and you probably don't have access to a bunch of the content that we've introduced that are like skill crossovers, and that's fine. You'll still be able to get there. You'll still have a lot of advantage to doing so. But it really is like the way that other skills can touch and work with sailing is really exciting to open up a lot of reward space. And obviously, like the fantasy that players have alluded to a lot, like you discover the location of an island, you work through it, you figure out how to get there. It was a challenge. You had to get this map piece from this part to the key, and you eventually get to an island, and the key now unlocks a dungeon, and now there's a boss in there. Great, right? You're moving out of sailing at that point, right? The sailing part was the journey to get there. But there's still the reward at the end of the day of having a cool dungeon or a boss to kill, and that with its own rewards.
Yeah, you might just need like 65 sailing to be able to manage to get to the island or whatever it is, right?
And get all the pieces or overcome the obstacles at sea. So even though like it's not necessarily like cool, it's a sailing reward, it's traditional content, or it is still, I think, reward space that's locked behind the skill in a cool and interesting and thematic way.
Awesome.
Similar to how like Zulrah is literally locked behind like access to Tranwin, right?
A lot of it is up to players as well, right? In refinement, like if you guys turn around and say, hey, I want a way to do farming but at sea, we'll be like, okay, do you want to farm corals? Like get out to sea and find a place with like unique corals and farm those, maybe. Do you want like a crossover with another skill? Do you want a new resource, new potions, right? Tell us what you guys want and we can make it happen.
Awesome. Yeah, and I would agree. With refinement, there is so much potential to work with the community. If the community has a really good suggestion about a reward space, I'm sure that we'd be more than happy to look at that and incorporate that if that were to proceed. Right, so just sailing up, what are you guys most excited about when you hear sailing?
Exploring the sea.
I am a sucker for Easter egg content. Anyone who's seen content I've touched knows that. And I guarantee I will want like a large amount of time at the end of this project to like just fill the sea with random Easter eggs, things to unlock. The idea that someone will post, wow, like there's this thing way over here and you needed to do all these things to access it, and it's literally just this weird cosmetic item or this weird bonus or this thing, like, or hey, it's a reference to some other content. There's so much scope for Easter egg content that gets me really excited as a dev.
I feel like you're out here putting Crack the Clue 12 in the game or something,
Maybe not quite, but yeah.
Kira, what about
I think it's absolutely the discovery. Like, what are you going to discover out there once you've got access to the ocean? Where you're going to get to, what treasures to be found, what creatures, all sorts of new types of creature could be added here, right? Like all sorts of awesome stuff. So,
Awesome. Yeah. For me, it's what you mentioned earlier about the icons on the map changing. I think seeing that much space, having so much content is going to be really, really cool for players.
New achievement diary.
Yeah.
The ocean.
I bet players will be mega excited about that. Okay, well, let's move on to taming then. Can you give us a rundown of taming?
Yeah, sure thing. So taming is, first of all, not summoning, but it's all about animal companions, right? You will go out in the world, you will find animals that you somehow want having them follow you, or you want, like bond with them, I guess. Hey, I thought this rabbit was cute, so I want that following me around. Or, hey, this monkey can like do cool stuff, so I want that one. It's all about finding the perfect companion for you, taming it, and then taking care of it and making sure that, it has a good life. And then, you know, in return, that companion can then do stuff for you, right? So it's a two-way street. That's pretty much like the core of it. I really like how taming has the potential of really like creating very quirky or unique, you know, different companions, such as like I could see you taming a monkey and it being a bit mischievous, you know, like if you have a banana in your inventory, maybe it steals it, sometimes eats it, right? Or something like that. Maybe in return though, if you treat it well, maybe it picks up your marks of grace, for example. Like just examples at this point, but yeah.
They feel believable, right? If we give the various creatures like different personalities, the way they might move around the player could be different. So I think we've had various conversations around like, we probably don't want your companion to just follow you like the pet system where it's just behind you all the time. It's a living creature, right? Like if it's, let's say it's a wolf, maybe it's guarding you and the way it moves and stands near you, maybe rather than behind you, could be different, right? Like for every different type of creature, its personality could be on show in the way it acts and how it moves around and so on. And there's a load of scope for like a lot of creativity there. And like to me, the variety of creatures we add to this system, I think, is where a lot of the value for this skill is.
I think it's a really easy sort of fantasy in-game to sort of imagine, right? People like owning pets in real life, and the closest we have to sort of a pet that you manage and interact with is the cat in-game. It's quite basic, it needs a little bit of attention to play with it, and will eventually be sent off to death runes. Like obviously, like we want something to be a bit more involved than that. I mean, you've got the pet system we've already explained mostly as a cosmetic, you know, rare drop from boss or skilling or an activity, and it just kind of follows you. But the idea that, what if that was something more, right? What if it was, hey, like, have you ever just, you've got the baby Chinchompa pet, but what if you could just have a Chinchompa and have it hunt stuff for you, or, you know, like do stuff, or like anyone who's owned a pet, it's, you see the growth of your pet, you know, starting off as a you got a dog, you got a puppy, I want to train it. It doesn't really know how to do fetch. It maybe sit is a really easy one, but heal is really hard. And then you ask it to go, you know, like do all these things, and eventually you see the growth as it moves through. And that's something we want to capture in this skill. With you're taking this creature, you're convincing it that you're not a threat, you know, that being with you is a positive thing, and that you help.
Even if you have 19 and Hunter.
Don't worry about it.
Ignore the animals I kill.
But yeah, the idea that you can help have this pet, that you help grow, and as a result of that bond, as a result of that, you know, I think one of the best lines in your video was the whole like fins, fangs, gills. These are things that you don't have that they do, right? You know, you form this bond, you treat it well, and it will help you on your adventures, right? And that space of helping you, I mean, that's the big unknown, right?
Yeah.
What exactly form does that take? We're at a pitch level selling a dream of like, this could interact with the gameplay in a bunch of ways, and let us know in refinement and get there. But it's just such an exciting thought. I mean, I think one of the games that we spoke about early on was like sort of thinking like all the Tamagotchi stuff, but leveled up, you know, and thinking about like what level of care, and obviously balancing how much care do we want to give. We don't want you to lose XP rates in all the skills that you're doing because it's such a high level of maintenance. Maybe that varies creature to creature, right?
We don't want it to be tedious either, like taking care of these creatures. It needs to feel rewarding and not tedious, essentially.
Yeah. I think in my head, it's like training your companion or growing your bond with that creature, whatever that shape that takes, is probably an active thing. Mm-hmm. Rather than a passive thing like it is with cats. So it's not some like tedious thing. I'm training fishing or woodcutting or whatever, I'm questing, and I need to have this annoying stack of food in my inventory to feed my cat every now and then. We want it to be much more interesting than that. Like maybe you take your companion to like a companion training center, you know, whatever that could look like, right? I think, as you say in your pitch, Elena, like if you're trying to train a baby dragon, the way you're going to train that's going to be very different to how you train a little sheep or something like that, for instance, exactly. Right? And it should feel real. But I think this permanence, this companionship, is the thing we really want to hammer home. This ain't a creature you're just going to pull out, it's going to do what you need to do and then shove it back in your bank straight away. It's a creature that's going to be with you and you want to train and like, as you say, like a pet, right? Something that actually is a companion. And who knows what you can do with them? Maybe you can battle other people's pets. Maybe you can, maybe you want to try and collect them and get as many companions as you can. Like, who knows? But I think that question about what can they do for you is a really interesting point.
The word permanence, I think you used, was a strong one. And when we were speaking to people getting feedback on this, and I'm going to steal this because I think it's great, is you don't want it to feel like an empty bucket with a hole in it, where I invest all this time into a creature and I sort of neglected it or wanted to do another activity for a few days, and you come back and, all that time and effort and work is now gone, right? The permanence needs to be there to a point of, sure, you're like, your creature gets injured, maybe you do want to get that treated, right? You know, like, get it bandaged up, that's fine. But it's probably not the point of like where you need to constantly stop what you're doing because this creature is apparently walking into everything and getting injuries left, right, and center, you know? Like, you do want that idea that, like, it is something you go out and say, I'm going to work on my taming, or hey, I've got a companion for this activity. Now it's brought to the forefront of gameplay, and where I left off is still relatively there, you know?
A big thing you touched on, Kieran, initially was how, you know, a baby dragon would be different to a sheep, right? And I could see that being true throughout the whole process, like all the while from the first time you try to tame it. First of all, they would be in completely different environments, right?
Yeah.
Sheep are in Lumbridge or, you know, in meadows. Dragons are in dungeons or in caves or, you know, far away in dangerous places. So first of all, it's all about locating it, right? Where is it? What environment does it thrive in? Second is, do you tame them the same way? A sheep is probably like a bit shy, a bit timid, maybe a bit scared, right? Maybe food driven, you know, give it some grass. A dragon, on the other hand, might attack you. So the way you tame them would probably be entirely different. Maybe the dragon needs to be, you know, calm down before you can even approach it. While the sheep, actually, you need to lure it to you and then become friends with it. So all the time, it's going to require you to act differently depending on what type of companion you have. And I think that's really interesting because that lets us tie this into other skills as well, right? So if you had a food-driven companion, for example, or a creature that you were trying to tame, we could tie in cooking, right? We could say, yeah, you know, at level 10 cooking, you can make this biscuit that this creature really likes, but at level 50, you can combine these two things that this other creature really wants. And yeah, there's a lot of avenues for tying in different skills.
And the magic is the unique things they'll be able to do for you. Like,
yeah,
I'm not sure we'll go down the route of say, hey, you've got this creature with you. Now when you fish, you get extra XP or faster catch rates. Like, we want to do something a bit more interesting than that, I think. And so that we don't end up in a space where, hey, the best way to train fishing now is to get 99 taming first and then take your creature fishing with you. I think unlocking new unique methods is much more interesting. So, hey, if you've got a bear and bears are good at fishing, there's a new type of fish you can catch now, perhaps. That's primarily got a different use. Obviously, these creatures can get access to different places, maybe, that you can't. So, hey, maybe there's this little fishing hole you couldn't get down before, a diving hole in a river. Who knows what it is? But once your creature's, like, fully trained, you'd be able to send your creature in and get access to whatever's in there. And I really like this idea that, like, if your creature is fully trained, that you go to this, like, little hole in a wall or whatever it is, you send your creature in, but then we actually let you control the creature. Yeah. Because it's like 100% obedient or whatever. And then you could have all sorts of different things where, like, it controls differently because you're controlling a dragon or something like that. In reality, it's your player commanding the dragon, but to you as the player, you're controlling the dragon directly. Maybe you could have different. What awesome combat things could you do with that? Or who knows, right? I think the possibilities are endless, and it sounds really cool to be able to do this stuff.
I think that it really does allow for this next level of being able to interact with the game world in different ways. I mean, you said a little hole to go down and fish, and I'm instantly thinking, God, something like an otter would be phenomenal to send down like a really small hole for fishing, whereas, you know, a bear fishing might interact in a different way. I think the abilities and reward space absolutely needs to be more interesting than if you have a fully trained bear, you get 5% fishing XP.
Yeah.
I mean, that would just be terrible game design, in my opinion. I think that, as you said, unlocking new stuff, having abilities. I think side perks and quirks could be interesting. You know, like maybe a beaver could occasionally help, like turn logs into planks or something, or you know, some side things that are not necessarily impacting XP, but maybe impacting metas could be fine. But I think unlocking new stuff is the most interesting thing. I mean, we've even had discussions of, are these following you all the time? Like, or do you have a trained companion and it stays local to this area, that it's allowed to like change how you operate in this area? I think one of the best examples is like, you know, the Piscator's Hunter area. It's got all these creatures and hunting. What if that like eagle that you borrow is like your eagle? And then it's only allowed to help you hunting in this area, and it unlocks Kebbit hunting, like if you were to use an example that exists, right? But you had to train that eagle, and then, but you can't take that eagle out of there because it stays in the Piscator's Hunter. I mean, maybe taking your companions everywhere is a good thing. Maybe keeping them to certain areas is a good thing. Those are specifics that we really are just like, we have to think about them at this point to think about, does this work in the game, right? What does it look like? Which direction can we figure out what's a bad idea versus what's a good idea? But really, like a lot of this stuff is, let us know, right? If this is the one that this prospect of taming creatures is like exciting, and you think that's what the new skill should be, let's move it into refinement and let's figure all that out. Because I mean, you already mentioned combat. That's a big question, right?
We'll get into that. I feel like we've answered a couple of questions already.
Jumped the gun a bit.
Jumped the gun just a little. I want to take a step back. I do want to say I love that you've highlighted the multiple training methods. You've highlighted that reward space. There's so much utility potential with this skill. But let's take a step back for a second. Why did we choose taming as a skill? What community consultation data did you mostly use to formulate this design?
So a big thing we saw, we asked the community, obviously, a lot of questions in community consultation. And one big trend that we saw was that players do like animal companions and that idea of them. And we saw, you know, we asked about RuneScape skills as well. You know, what do you like in RuneScape? And summoning was an interesting one. I mentioned it earlier, right? But this isn't summoning, but there are things from summoning that you guys like, and there are obviously things that you don't like. Stuff like picking up the charms, right? That made you go back and do Slayer again to pick up those charms. That won't be in taming, right? But the fact that you had an animal companion and you could, you know, have that out, it looks cool, it can do stuff for you. People seem to like that, and we wanted to take the good parts of summoning without the bad parts.
Was it interesting that the animal companion side of it wasn't the most polarizing part of the skill, that players actually like that part of?
I found it interesting, but also understandable. There are other games out there that really play into this, and I think that, you know, we can easily, everyone who's had a pet can kind of relate to this feeling of, this little creature, I'm taking care of it. You would probably die on your own, to be honest, but I kind of like you, so I keep you around.
Domestication is as old as time, right? You know, having, you know, whether it was people training dogs to retrieve, to hunt, or, you know, like we now have horses we can ride and all this stuff. I think it's something that is so grounded in the real world that to me it really just said, when I say, hey, would taming be a skill in old school RuneScape? You hear the word taming and you probably instinctively know like what kind of things that would involve. As you mentioned, the reward space is a big question. You know, open that Pandora's box of it. But I think that really, like, it's such an understandable thing. It's such a relatable thing. As you said, like having a companion help you in video games is a thing that players like. And yeah, honestly, like I think out of all of our initial pitches that we were, you know, throwing around, brainstorming, it was one that stood out like really early and just held up throughout. You know, there were a bunch of ideas that we explored for other skills that just never worked out or we weren't sure. And everyone just looked at taming and went, yeah, I mean, taming's solid. We really like taming. It would really work. We think we could do it really well, and we think our players would love it.
It was the #1 unique mechanic when we asked you in the survey, what kinds of unique mechanics would you be interested in? That came out on top, beating boats even by a slight majority. So yeah, really, really interesting that it held up throughout community consultation. We obviously touched on the fact that it ties in with other skills. Could players reasonably expect this to tie into Hunter, for example? Is there a distinct difference between Hunter and Taming?
So I think this is something that when we give we go for a lot of feedback internally and talk about it, Hunter comes up a lot because it is still, there are these creatures out there in the wild and you interact with them, and there is like a similarity in concept, but I think they fall apart when you think that Hunter really is about turning the creatures of the land into a resource in some way, right? Whether that's hunting them for meat or to become a explosive projectile like a chinchompa or a salamander that you're just kind of like shooting flames at. Salamander's probably the closest like tie to anything sort of taming wise when you think about it, right? Because you're feeding it and it's breathing fire on things, I guess. But when we thought about it, like they really are distinct in the whole domestication is different from hunting. And even the whole like taming domestication side of it, taming a creature to help you hunt is an overlap the skills could quite easily have. That's something that exists in the real world, as I mentioned earlier. But I think that it is something that feels like it can be very distinct and doesn't, to me, have a lot of overlap. And I think that I could see a player sort of suggestion, hey, hunting is, a little bit lacking in content, right? It's literally just like chinchompas for the most part, or herbivore. Could you just move all this into Hunter as like a sub part of Hunter? And to me, the thematics just clash too heavily with what they're trying to achieve. And just because Hunter's a little lacking, I don't think we should force a skill into it. And even in the survey, when we asked, it was like a big thing. It's like, should a skill address like long-standing game issues? And there was like quite a large like support against it being specifically to solve long-standing game issues. Obviously, if we can do it passively, that's great. But to me, it just feels too much forcing into another skill that's trying to do something different. And just because we release Taming doesn't mean that we can't look to address Hunter's problems in the future, like we do with skills like on the yearly, really.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. Hunter's got a lot of content. It's just mostly lacks reward, right?
Yeah.
A lot of it doesn't stack up for training because the XP is poor, or you just simply get nothing out of it other than fur you don't need and bones that you just want to drop or bone crush. Now, this is where taming has potential to actually, I think taming could help quite a lot of the skills out, because suddenly you might need a lot of different food types, resources to help tame your creatures, resources to help build their enclosures, whatever it is. So you can imagine like maybe there's new food types that are added to like Hunter that are suddenly really valuable. Maybe on the flip around, like you've tamed a wolf, there's a new Hunter method that involves using your wolf to help hunt new creatures. So, and I'm just using Hunter as an example, but this could apply to a lot of different skills as well. Different concoctions that you can brew with herb lore, because maybe it's a treatment for some illness or something your creature's got. It could be, farming new types of berry because that's going to be valuable for your creature as well. Like, I think it can really work well with a lot of the different skills we have in game. Either giving them new rewards with new resources, looking at underutilized resources right now and giving those a use. Or obviously, as I say, flip it around and what can taming do for the other skills as well. So yeah, I think it's really cool and how well this can slot into the game and basically enhance a lot of the other systems we already have.
So exciting. Elena, I want to talk more about how the skill differs from summoning. So you touched on it, but can you explain, because I think this is going to be a really hot topic, how does it differ from summoning? What did we know from feedback about summoning?
The similarities are animal companions that can do stuff for you, right? The problem with summoning is that is almost just the reward space of summoning. That's not actually how you train the skill. So one comparison that I like to draw with summoning is actually, it is more similar to rune crafting in how you train it. You have something in the bank, right? A resource. You take it to an altar or a location in the world. You imbue the thing, you go back. The stuff that you imbue is either runes or summoning pouches, I believe. And then you just repeat that process, and that is how you train it. And then later, yeah, you can use those animals as you please. But you also just summon them, and then when you're done, you kind of just throw them away. And we wanted to really emphasize how this is all about the care for that animal, right? Your bond, you see it through from, you know, initial like domestication of that animal to feeding it, to taking care of it, healing its wounds, giving it its favorite foods, building it a nice home, and then in return, it chooses to help you. So that is, to me at least, the main difference, is that bond, that connection that you have to the animal that is helping you out.
Awesome, great answer.
And in summoning as well, the pouches are no different from a potion, right? You just buy them from the Grand Exchange, it does a thing to help you with something, and then you're done with it, right? That disposability is something that I guess really is a big difference between the two. You know, if you care for your pet and it gets there with you, and like, it is a permanent work on that bond with your pet, right? And I mean, we haven't really touched on it, I suppose, but if death was a thing for your companions, if, you know, there was a way that you either mistreated it and it is no longer a companion for you, like, maybe you need to start from square one with another companion, right? I think those are very specific details we would want to work out. Is that something players want, or is it like, oh, like, I don't want to have to redo this, which is fine. You know, those are things we want to explore, but it is really about that, like, the creature matters, you know?
Cool.
Absolutely. One thing we haven't really talked about much yet is like, how do you actually train taming? Because we've talked a lot about the rewards, right? Oh, these are all the cool things that your animals can do for you. And this is how you train summoning. But we haven't actually talked a lot about how your companions can train. And one thing that I mentioned in the pitch is that you can actually level up your companions. So separately to your taming level, the companions also have a level, right? Yep. And at least how I imagine it is that you would probably always tame them at level 1. And maybe they only have a max level of like 10 or so. So it's not a huge amount. But as their level increases, their abilities get stronger. And I imagine the way you train them to be at dedicated sites around the world. So it's not about, you know, taking them fishing, right? And training them that way. Maybe you get some token amounts of XP from that, but ultimately that is more a reward from having trained your creature. I would like to see dedicated taming activities that are purely there for gaining XP for the creature and for you as well. And I could see that taking shape in stuff like, you know, you need to track something. Maybe like you tame an armadillo in the desert and it needs to like track down a bit of treasure in the desert, and it can dig down through the sand and find that for you, right? But that is an activity that you and your companion go out and you do together. Or a wolf, right? Maybe you compare it to like real life dog agility and have like dedicated obstacle courses that it needs to maneuver throughout. And then in the future, that wolf, because it's done that, now it can navigate through dungeons for you, right? Because it's learned that skill. So it's super interesting to think about how these companions can get trained as well. It's not just you leveling up, it's also the companions.
Cool. So I just want to clarify that. What's the core gameplay loop then? How do you earn XP? Similar to how Husky explained sailing XP, how do you earn XP with taming?
So first off, acquire a creature, right? Go to where it is in the world. That could be existing creatures, that could be new creatures as well. I mentioned armadillo as like a wild example, but yeah, find the creature and then bring, you know, whatever tool you need for that type of creature. So maybe like a lasso if it's a dangerous creature, or some type of food if it's more like food driven. Once you've acquired it, I could see the taming process like being, you know, more interactable as well, potentially. Like maybe you start taming it, but then like events can happen, right? It starts to run away and you need to react to that, or it ate up all the food, so you need to give it more. Or it got bored of that food, so now you need to spice it up with something else.
Sounds like me.
And then once you've acquired that creature, you need to take it somewhere, right? To train it up, because it's going to be level 1, so it's not going to be able to do much just yet. So you might take care of it. Maybe it got bruised, right, when you tamed it, or maybe it has an existing injury, so you patch it up, you know, bandage it, and then you take it to one of these dedicated training sites. And I could see, like the wolf I mentioned, right, could do agility-like things. You just basically try to customize your creature's journey depending on what kind of creature that is. But yeah, and then once you've trained it, you can then use it wherever you'd like, really, where it makes sense.
I think one thing I'd like to add is that as far as getting the XP, our goal isn't to make it so that the optimal way to get XP is to tame and release and tame and release and tame and release, right? You would get some XP for taming, but we would try and balance things in a way where doing the activities with your creature and helping level them up is the bulk of the XP that you're getting. And I think that as far as the player journey, when they start off, we definitely don't want it to go, hey, day one, here's taming. You found a sheep, and then now you need to have it, it gives you some weird benefit while doing some other activity that you were already doing, and now you're just doing the same activity you were doing the day before, except with a sheep, right?
Yeah.
And that's giving you passive XP while doing it, because that's the efficient way. We do want the emphasis to be on the new activities that we introduce with the skill, and that being the exciting thing that you're doing on day one. And as you progress through levels, you'll be able to tame more creatures, you'll be able to do new activities with them, new training methods, or new, other pieces of content that exist in the world. So that gameplay loop should feel very varied, and basically just trying to fix problems we've seen with some existing skills. Like we don't want the construction dream of, imagine building your house and it's just building 50 billion oak chairs.
I've been through that.
do we imagine all these creatures are going to be like, two wolves, are they the same? Or will they have unique personality types? So will it differ based on how you've trained them and that sort of thing?
I think that's something we absolutely want to explore. I think that it comes down to, fob it off as, we'll look at it in refinement. Like, we can obviously answer a lot of questions with that, but I mean, what you're asking is that something we're interested in? And that is something that we would like to do. I think even the idea that maybe you choose different abilities. Maybe one wolf can't be a master of everything, so you need a couple of different wolves, one specialized in this, one specialized in that. We even spoke briefly about the idea of finding the great elusive wolf of the mountains as this rare type of wolf, and maybe that's the one you want to train as your companion. It's special and better than other wolves. We obviously spoke about the redundancy of, now you only ever have this one type of wolf and it's the best one. Maybe we want to look to avoid that by, once you've tamed it, it can teach your other wolves something, so you could still have your precious one that you had from the get-go. Or, I'm obviously using wolves, I have a husky pet, I'm a bit biased. The idea that we've explored all these different ideas to make them feel unique. We just don't know what that looks like right now. I think one of the examples that jumped to my mind straight away was Pokemon have natures is the easiest one. And I don't think we would simple stat differences be enough? I think for me, it's all about quirkiness. Even if you've owned two of the same type of dog, some are a bit more chill, some of them want to be more active. I mean, I love and hate both my pets at different times of the day, right? Depending on what they want to do, or, if you've ever owned a husky, it's the barking back at you. If it's giving you sass and stuff, whereas, the shepherd, he doesn't give me sass. He's, so all these things are, I think, way more interesting things to explore to keep them feeling different than just a simple plug it into a spreadsheet. What's the most optimal wolf that I need to keep taming and releasing for to get,
I mean, there's so many possibilities. I'm literally just imagining us airing this live on Twitch and people giving their opinions right now in the chat about Pokemon and Tamagotchi. Personally, I threw my Tamagotchi out the window because it was making too much noise, so I don't think I'd be very good at taming. All right, I want to touch on if animal companions should interact with existing combat, because from community consultation, we were not 100% sure what the community thought. And we did mention in the pitch, this is kind of down to refinement. We want the community to decide. So, Elena, if you could kick us off with how you feel animal companions should interact with combat, if at all.
Sure. So it's an interesting topic. I'm not quite sure where I sit on it, and I'd very much like to lean on the community for this, but I could see it going either way, right? In community consultation, players said they wouldn't like a dedicated new combat skill, right? You have attack, strength, defense. You wouldn't want a fourth kind of thing there. But indicated that it would be okay to touch combat in smaller portions. So an impact on combat could work, right? And it's a matter of, with taming, I think touching combat kind of makes sense. Like, if you have a big bear, yeah, sure, it could be used for fishing, but bears are strong. They have big claws. They have teeth, right? Why wouldn't you use that as well? It makes sense in that regard. I know that combat can be a very touchy subject as well. So obviously, if you guys don't want that, we don't need to go down that route. And I think taming can kind of just stand on its own without it. But I do think it would make more sense to include combat.
I mean, the thing about this discussion is it really is preempting something that is refinement focused, right?
Yeah.
I think that it's something that we can't really just not address, though, because it is one of the things that players will assume, like, oh, I have questions about combat, summoning did it, and even like summoning raised your combat level. Should taming raise your combat level? I mean, if they are helping you in combat, it is helping your combat prowess, but obviously players could be really attached to the 126 combat level. I think it is even just like, it could feel really weird, right? We introduced thralls to the game and they hit between 0 and 3, and it's a substantial DPS increase. You're going from, in some cases, like you maybe have 6, 7 DPS and you get an extra 0.6, like that's 10% of your damage just for free, just from no interactivity. And would it not feel weird to have like a bear, like maybe a bear hitting 3s would be fine, but if you have a stronger creature like a bear, like a baby dragon or something, and it's hitting 3s, right? Is that not just going to feel really weird in the game world? And I think it is something that we would be open to players, but we can't just, I think regardless, combat with your companion would have to have some sort of limitations, restrictions, and rules. Because if your damage per second just increased by 50% across the game world, that's going to have massive knock-on effects to everything from bossing metas. And it's not just about, oh, I get 50% more Bandos kills. I mean, you got things like a Blood Fury amulet, right? You know, that's lifesteal has impact on boss kill trips. Like, once you get to a critical mass of DPS, you stop needing to heal at all. And it's just, there's this whole, like, this is why I call it Pandora's box earlier. There is all these millions of questions that players could ask about in these weird situations and what ifs. And I think that that's just, we would have a dedicated combat section of refinement that would need its own discussion. There's even ideas that, cool, it works in combat, it can't be used overworld generally, it won't help you on Slayer, it won't help you on bossing, but maybe there's specific pieces of content that we introduce with the skill that are combat related activities for creatures that your companions will be exclusively used in, or like maybe both you and your companion can fight together in this dungeon that was built for it, or maybe, like as you alluded to earlier, maybe there's like battles, right? So the combat elements are having the strongest companion out of all the other players and they're all fighting each other and stuff, and like
Totally ethical.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's all for sport, for fun. Nobody dies in a battle. You get reduced to 1 hit point, and your pet.
You just go back to Lumbridge.
You pick your pet up from Lumbridge, yeah, or your companion from Lumbridge. But I don't know. Like, this is a complicated topic. Even down to, should it work in PvP? Are PvP builds going to be expected to have 99 summoning, especially if it doesn't raise your combat level, because we want to stay at 126? They might feel obligated to, so that's like a restriction we might add. Maybe PvPers really want them to work in combat though, so maybe that's a PvP only question, or maybe, like, I don't know. Like I say, we're preempting a lot of potential discussion. Should this skill be selected for refinement? But at least for the players, it's important to know that we're aware of this, right? We're not just going, yeah, like, vote blindly and say yes because you want a cute companion. There are other things, and I think that we can solve all these. Like, none of these are problems we can't solve. We're excited to solve them, and we're excited to hear all your ideas as well.
Yeah,
you know,
I think it will be very reassuring for players to know that we're not pushing specifically for this. This is something that we're open to. Mm-hmm. I think players show that they're slightly naturally averse to any changes to combat, understandably. It affects balance. So this is something that we would work closely on refinement with you on. Now, finally, to wrap up for taming, what are you guys most excited for when it comes to taming?
I want to say finding the creature that like best represents me, I guess, and the possibility of finding a unique creature that maybe no one else has. You know, I did the quest that unlocked this new area where this creature only shows up like once in a blue moon, you know? And showing that off and everyone going like, whoa, how did you get that? That looks so cool. I really love that idea.
I think for me, and I alluded to it earlier, it's having different companions that are quirky and different in their own ways. Like, if one of my first things putting through to like the engine team and art would be like, I want these creatures to have different idle animations depending on what they are, different patrol routes around the creature. Maybe they even vary based on, you have, like, I'm going to use the example of wolf again, a wolf who guards and walks close to you versus a wolf who's head of the pack and scouting for danger, you know, because that's their role. And or like, you know, the idea that like a companion could be sassy back to you and you tell it to do something. Like, we mentioned the idea of a monkey stealing like a banana. What if it steals your whip and runs away?
Oh no!
You catch it. Obviously, it's kind of a joke there. We probably wouldn't have it steal your equipment to that
calm
level.
down.
But just the idea that they have these funny little personalities. And I mean, one of the biggest ones that catches me as my child is like Ash's Charizard is like the biggest personality. Like, this thing's like, yeah, I'll fight this thing, but if you're not giving me a big enough challenge or I don't think you're good enough, I'm going to breathe fire on you. Maybe a bit extreme for our players, but just that idea of personality is there, right? It's not just like, at least in that example, it wasn't just a Charizard, like Ash's Charizard, you know. So what does Husky's wolf look like versus Elena's wolf, you know, and like them being different entities is really exciting.
Awesome. And Kieran, what about you?
I think for me, I mean, the whole skill's awesome. I think there's so much potential with this, with the variety of creatures, but I think it's what you'll be able to do with the creature that you can't currently do, whatever that looks like, that excites me. Maybe it's getting through to this cave that you can't currently access, but the creature can. That sort of thing, I think, is what's exciting.
Awesome. All right, we are ready to talk about shamanism. Elena, can you give us the rundown of shamanism?
Sure. So shamanism is a new gathering and a production skill all combined into one. It's all about finding the power of nature, basically, and utilizing it to craft new things. There are a couple of things you can do differently in gathering. So there will be new nodes or new like places you can gather stuff from around the world. I imagine that being like kind of naturey stuff like twigs and leaves and that kind of stuff. And then the portion of it being, you know, things from animals or more sort of like, you know, a hellhound horn or that kind of stuff. And then you take that and you take spiritual components. Shamanism allows you to go to the spirit realm and gather spiritual components or spiritual, you know, items. You combine those two in a ritual to craft new items. And the new items will be kind of like utility items. I'm sure we'll dive deeper into that in a little bit, but essentially, high-level overview, that's what shamanism is all about.
Very exciting, something very different as well.
Yeah.
Husky, did you want to add anything to what shamanism is?
No, I think that it's, I think you covered it. It is taking components from nature and infusing them with stuff from the spirit realm. As a gathering is getting all the stuff for that, and the spirit realm and the production of it is the things that you're going to be making to do with it, right? I think that's always the hard thing, right? You know, with any sort of gathering production skill is that, like, when you boil them down to basics, they really are just basic, you know? But we definitely wanted to have some sort of gathering or production skill or some representation in these pitches. And the idea of combining them is something that we haven't done in old school. So I think, personally for me, that's quite exciting.
And the spirit realm aspect of the skill is kind of another aspect of the skill, right? Like, you will be able to, at certain sites, certain locations in game, I think we're using the term like disturbed sites particularly, where the world is close to the spirit realm, and you'll be able to fully enter in the spirit realm using your shamanism skill. Maybe it's locked behind certain levels, who knows? But in the spirit realm, things are different. That, you know, we use the obvious example of like a door that's locked in the main world may be unlocked in the spirit realm. And so this is a real chance to add like a bit of discovery, a bit of exploration like elements to shamanism as well, going beyond just the basic gathering and production components. And I like that. I think it's so cool to imagine like what an alternative reality version in the spirit realm of like what something like Lumbridge could look like. And it's a real chance for us to be super creative with what we do. The other thing I really liked, particularly from the video, is like, I want to know what a spleen of a frog's going to be used for.
I think as well, like, if you've ever like seen content surrounding like shamans, shamans, whatever way of pronunciation our players want. It's always like, I see it with my third eye, and everyone's like, what?
There's nothing there. What are you seeing?
What? But players in our game are the masters of all trades, right? They're working on all these skills, all these like ways of becoming better. So the idea that, you know, this is something the players can't currently do, but once they are trained in the way of shamans, they gain access to, oh wow, like I see what these people are talking about, and this being able to tap into the spirit realm, the powers of nature. As you said, really exciting. And while it's an obvious example for the locked door, I think it's also the best way to describe like a new way of traversing the game world, a new way to introduce problem solving. And who knows like what the spirit realm is. We don't have a clear idea of, oh, it's just Gielinor, but like slightly different. I know that RuneScape have one, and for them it's wilderness only, and the idea that a bucket that's full in one world is empty in the other, and vice versa. We're looking to expand it, and we're wanting to really flesh out what is there. I believe it's the origins of the corporeal beast in RuneScape, is it not, with that quest? And you killed it in that realm, and that's why it exists in your realm. But there's definitely ways we can explore that and figure out with the community what to do with the spirit realm. But it's I think it's a way that it's that spice that levels this skill up to me beyond just take stuff, combine them, make stuff, right?
I think it's really grounded as well. It's very RuneScapey to have, you know, gathering and production elements. I think most of the skills are either gathering or production, right? And utility is very much like additional systems on top of it. But gathering and production is, to me at least, what I think of when I hear skilling. The other thing as well is what you mentioned about the third eye. That was kind of like the start of how we came up with shamanism, right? Is we had this idea of like, what if there's something that you could see that has always been there, but you're only now learning how to see it? And I think that's such an interesting idea, and one that we could take in different directions, right? We've chosen shamanism because we think that's pretty cool. But that is something we could have done with exploration, for example, is that like your skill with exploring the area has led to you seeing this like little trapdoor or something. But instead with shamanism it's you've trained shamanism to the point where you can see this overlap with the spirit realm, and you can utilize that and go through and actually experience what it's like on the other side.
And what I mentioned earlier about themes being required to understand a skill, I think is doubly more important for something that's gathering in production. Like I used the examples earlier of the smithing skill for armor and stuff. You could probably have a bunch of skills that all do the same thing as shamanism that we're trying to pitch. You probably lose the spirit realm, but the idea of, you gather stuff as one skill, and in the same skill, you use them to produce utility items. Cool. But the theme is what makes that interesting, right? The idea that, what if those gathering components are from nature? What if in producing them is taking the power of nature, infusing them, power of the spirit realm, infusing them, and making these cool things? And then, I already sort of alluded to, but just the idea of it being shamanism, something that exists in our game. We have lizardmen shamans, we have ogre shamans, we have the Taibo one-eye shamans. The idea that that's a skill and a profession that exists in the world, and you're now tapping into, as you said, discovering something that was already there. It just felt like a really cool thematic to go down. And I think if it wasn't a shaman, you would instantly lose the spirit realm. We'd probably look into other stuff, but I think it just kind of shows how important the thematic is for a skill and the doors it can unlock into potential content.
Or the realms it could unlock.
It does feel like something that's already there.
Yeah.
Like nature spirit in Mauritania as well. Like the way you bless, there's magic coming out of those, things in the swamp where you get your Maya fungi from and stuff like that. It's there. It's stuff like the Draman staff. Right, that's a magical tree that you're using that to get the staff to access the fairy rings and so on. But I like the idea, not that this is necessarily canon yet as we would work these things out, but these are all different takes on the same thing, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
the way the nature spirit sees it might be slightly different to maybe how the fairies see it or how the lizardmen shamans see it, but they're all actually interacting with the same actual entity, even if they've got different terminology for it and so on. And I like that this feels like it's something that is there. We're just now exploring it for the first time.
And magic is a thing that has been almost like a thing we've had to bear in mind while working on this pitch a lot. Magic is a concept in fantasy worlds, is like, cool, yeah, we can do things that are abnormal. And in our game, we only really have two things that tie to magic. One is magic and one is prayer. And our magic system specifically uses runes as you take these magically infused essence and you can cast spells and produce effects. And there is magic in Gielinor that exists outside of that, right? You know, the magic that exists through things like the Jungle Potion and Shallow Village quest feels very different, or the magic that like Aggie performs where she's making, it's kind of herblore-esque and she's making a potion, but like it's not. Like the idea that there is some other form of manipulating what is the magical energies of Gielinor outside of a magic skill, which is very themed about the way that magic is trapped in runes, is that's the aspect we're trying to explore here with, just sort of really diversifying what it means to tap into the magic of the world.
Like, how are the magic carpets in the desert? Where they come from?
Yeah, who knows,
maybe
right?
That's some
I don't
sort
think they
of
use
special
runes.
fabric that's been made from various
Do you see,
natural elements, right?
do you see stacks of runes next to those carpet salesmen? No, they're not. They're not casting magic to make those carpets fly. You know, there's something else going on there.
That is so exciting. I love it. Right, I want to touch on why shamanism was chosen, because it is something different, it's something unique, but we've also touched on how it can feel really familiar as well. You know, the core gameplay loop seems quite simple and quite akin to something that we would see already in game. So why did we choose shamanism? Why did we design it based on community consultation? What kind of elements of player feedback did we really look at with shamanism?
I think the thing for me, at least, that sparked it was that conversation about what if you could see something that wasn't there, right? Opening the third eye and then trying to tie a thematic to that. What could that look like? The other two skills that we've pitched have been utility skills, which was in community consultation, the type of skill you guys wanted the most. But I think that there is something, it's worth proposing different ideas as well, right? Some of you guys might find this more appealing than utility skills. And to me, at least, like I said before, it's more grounded in that sense. It does feel more like traditional skilling. So we thought this would be a good thing to offer up as well.
And the themes of nature and magic were quite prominent in what players were saying as well. And this was obviously an amazing way to combine both of those and also offer something for those players that didn't ask for a utility skill and wanted maybe some gathering, production, and more traditional. Obviously, we're getting to combine them here and hopefully appeal to all of those players.
I think it's also us looking beyond what the data looks like from the onset. So while utility is like 50-something%, like everyone's, oh yes, we want utility, and gathering and production have a mixed lower down, and combat is something people want, but very polarizing. First of all, if you combine gathering and production together, there's quite a strong percentage of people, but also just the question is almost flawed in a sense, right? Because gathering and production are very defined things the player's used to. Combat is, okay, there's a gray area. Is it a new combat style or is it affecting combat? But utility could be anything, right? It's that idea of opening the mystery box. And I think it automatically grabs people's appeal to want to vote utility. And I think it's fundamentally utility is typically like some other system like skill mix, right? Slayer is a system that's a skill, but it's utility. And I think that that's the kind of wall that you try and break through, is trying to understand why is it that people want utility? And I think that we can't just ignore the fact that RuneScape, or old school RuneScape at its core, is about gathering and production. That's where a lot of the skills started. There's a strong desire for it, and for me, shamanism is a way that we can go, cool, we wanted to have something different, as you said. We want not all of our pitches to be utility. We want something to feel different, but also something to feel homey and familiar. Another gathering production skill accomplishes that, and it was just which theme, right? you could apply any theme to sort of a gathering production, and this is the one that we felt was, say, the most grounded in the world, the one that felt really interesting to explore, that kind of thing.
It's also a bit mysterious, right? I feel like sailing and taming are both exciting, but they're not mysterious. Like, we understand them, you know? Shamanism is more about the unknown, I feel like. So it made sense to tie it to like a type of magic, right? Which was a really popular thing amongst the players, but we also didn't want it to seem like warding, right? We talked about production and magic, and suddenly that is what warding was. We didn't want any like sort of crossover to that because shamanism is quite different. So we tried to lean more into the nature part of it, which also we found works well in the world because we have those references already.
I think this will be the most surprising pitch.
Yeah.
Like, of the three. I'm not sure I've ever seen somebody say this exact word, shamanism, with a submission before. I think people have thought about the ideas of companions, obviously, probably because of summoning somewhat. And obviously sailing's been around a long, long time. So it's going to be surprising, I think. But I think it really hits some nail on the head for filling a gap that we're not offering with the other two skills. And I think it's really valuable that the three skills we offer are different. They're not slightly different versions of the same thing. They are three distinct skills that interact with the world in different ways. This one's the most different from the other two, and I think that's exciting for us.
And while I think I said earlier that sailing and taming, you hear those words, you know what the skill's probably going to be. I think that's where shamanism doesn't really have the same thing. Shamanism could probably be a raising spirits and fighting them in combat, if you thought about that. There are different types of shaman in different types of fantasy game genres out there. We've obviously gone for a very gathering production route. I think that that thematic is just the important part. I mean, you can already think of shamans, like we've said, cool, like what if you had like things like tikis and poultices and weird quirky things. We don't know what those rewards are right now. We don't know how a tiki is different from a relic, different from this, but they're things that you feel like connected to that identity of a shaman, to where I think even that name still, the name still provides a clear boundary where like this is what this skill should operate in thematically, do for gameplay loops and that kind of thing.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Thanks for answering that. Really appreciate it. And I definitely, I remember when we were talking earlier about how the skill has to be a WoW skill. It can't just be a traditional gathering production. So that extra layer of the spirit realm, I think, really allows players to interact with the game world in a new way. And we hope you guys will love it, should it proceed through. Can we talk a bit more about the gameplay loop of shamanism? How would players expect to gain XP through training the skill?
So the first step is going out and gathering components. We asked in the survey, I believe, if the new skill should be buyable, and players clearly said no, it shouldn't. So how do we make a production skill that isn't buyable, right? Because you look at the current ones like crafting, smithing, you could just buy the materials and train the skill. And that might work well in the early days of a game where there aren't that many of those resources, but with something brand new like this, it makes it really fast for the people who have the money to buy the resources, and then really slow for the people who don't. And that's something we wanted to avoid with this skill, which is why we wanted to add the gathering part of it, where we expect the majority of the gathering components to be untradeable. So you'd go out and gather untradeable materials, and then you'd take that to a ritual circle. Our current idea of a ritual circle is something that you draw on the ground somewhere. Similar to in fire making, how you can make a fire in the overworld somewhere. You'd be able to draw that ritual circle on the ground, and then maybe other players could utilize it as well, right? And that's where you take all your ingredients and then produce stuff, and that is what gives you the majority of the XP.
Awesome. It should seem relatively familiar, like it feels the most grounded in terms of what old school players are used to when you think about a skill and a new skill. Let's talk about the name. Is it shamanism or SHA-manism? What do you guys think? What do you think at home if you're watching this? Shamanism, SHA-manism?
SHA-manism for me.
Shamanism.
It's shamanism for me, but tomato, is it book or book? You know, say it however you want. But I think that I don't know, shamanism for me.
Is it a
was
British American thing?
I don't know. I say shamanism, but I have a weird accent anyway. I think the name was something that we talked about a lot internally as well. A lot. Because we were like, okay, we know the thematic that we want. Is shamanism the right word? Or shamanism? Whatever. Is it the right word? And we were like, maybe it could be witchcraft, you know? What other things, like ritualism, maybe? But ultimately, we felt like shamanism really best fit that thematic that we wanted.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things when it comes to a name. It needs to be understandable what the skill is. It needs to be, first of all, from the name, in terms of, I hear the name, I kind of know the things that I'm doing, but also setting the boundaries on what the skill is. I think we had some very like open out there names, like mysticism was thrown around. You're like, cool, like it's kind of magically, mysticism also maybe feels a bit more tied to deities and religion more, but you just hear mysticism and you're like, I probably want to Google what a mystic is first to like understand what that skill is, and we didn't really want that like middle step, and it just felt like sort of shaman as a concept was more generally sort of known. And I think even with other skill, like if it was called witchcraft, would I envision like a spirit realm? Maybe not. If it was called mysticism, probably not. So I think shamanism opened the door to like that cool thematic twists that we wanted with the skill, more so than some of the other skill names would.
One thing we thought about as well was like druidism, right? Because we thought nature magic kind of makes sense, but druids in our game are more related to herb lore, and for it to be more about rituals and even the spirit realm, right? We felt shamanism was, you know, a slightly different take on a similar but not exactly the same thing.
Yeah, we definitely went like druidism, druidcraft maybe, but if you said what is the production skill of druids, you would just say herb lore, right? I think it had too much of an identity overlap with what it was trying to achieve in the game. And it's almost a silly argument as well, right? Well, druids could produce multiple different things, like, and they don't really have the same reward space, but like, I've said the word thematic, like probably count it, like have a counter on the screen. How many times has Mod Husky said thematic, right? But that really is what it's about. And I think it is such an important part of the skill. You could have, like woodcutting and fishing are the same skill with a different thematic and a slight twist on gameplay, you know?
Indeed.
Makes a lot of sense, yeah. I think the name is tied to the thematic, so changing the name would obviously change the skill significantly. We talked a little bit about the spirit realm, and I think players are going to be very curious about what that might look like. Could it be something that you overlay on the game, or is it like a brand new area of the game? What do you guys think?
So it's an interesting topic, and I guess the answer is we still don't know for sure what form it takes, right? Because it could go either way. My personal favorite is for it to be a brand new area that you can access, and you can access, you know, different parts of it depending on where in the world you access it from. But I could see it being, you know, literally a mirrored version of the game as well, and you can interact with similar things, but it's just mirrored your game screen. Like that could be a thing. It could be an overlay to the world, but I think, to me at least, the idea of like a completely new environment based on the existing environment, right, but different.
It could be all of the above.
Yeah, it could be.
Where you've accessed the spirit realm, what's caused it to be disturbed or whatever. Like, I think we can experiment and try different things in different locations.
Yeah.
So I think even the word spirit is a bit ambiguous, right? I mean, we have spirits in our game that are different from ghosts. Ghosts have like an undead feel, but like I think there are some similarities between the two. People think of spirits like ancestral spirits, you know, the spirits of my ancestors is a talk. Maybe that's something. I've seen all forms of media with different spirit realms. Like, is it literally the land of the undead, or is it more crazy, weird world with floating islands, that waterfalls that lead to nowhere, kind of like, or is it a copy of Gielinor that's been tweaked and warped? I mean, I'm willing to see all sorts of concept art from players and what they think it could be. I know we've suggested a few, but really, we're not set in stone with that. I think the gameplay specifics of it are the things that we want to figure out. Like, I wouldn't want it to be instanced. Like, I think, as you said, like being a real place you can visit, am I gauged on how long I can be there or how far into the spirit realm I can get based on my shamanism level or my level of interaction with the spirit realm? I think there's a lot of interesting gameplay aspects that we can explore there, the types of resources you can gain from it. Maybe you go there and there's a tree and you're like, oh, fantastic, I get to harvest some spirit logs. But like an axe doesn't work, right? Or something, so you need to, it opens up like these interesting challenges for us to potentially look at and solve. Yeah.
And it's also like, what else can you do in there, right? Sure, you go there primarily to gather spiritual components, whether that's logs or whatever that is. But maybe there is also a dungeon in there, right? Maybe you can fight a boss in there. Who knows? You know, that there could be new skilling methods to existing skills. Like, the sky's the limit.
To me, when it comes to looking at the skills, and I'm like, cool, core gameplay loop of sailing done, let's add content to the sea, and that's like a bulk of the time, right? Taming's done, core gameplay loop of taming is done, let's think of adding more creatures, more abilities, more content to do with them. When it comes to shamanism, I'm like, the core gameplay loop is probably really simple. We have to code the specific interactions of the rewards you're making from output of the skill, you know, but then any remaining time is, what is the spirit realm? You know, how do we explore that? How does that navigate? How does that work? How is it visually shown in the game even, right? I mean, I think one of the concept art are really cool, like jagged cut through the game world where you can kind of see both at once. Is that how it looks, or is it not? Is it weird, or is it weird portals, or is it, I don't know. Very exciting stuff, though.
Excited to see how it turns out.
Absolutely. It's stuff that we can talk with you about in refinement and really get your views on it. Because this is obviously very early stages of design. We haven't committed any more resource to it. So should it be something that resonates with you guys, we'd love to hash that out with you further. Let's talk about one of the more perhaps contentious areas of the skill. We don't know yet. Obviously, the pictures will be live now. But we're in the past at the moment. So one of the biggest draws of the skill is actually the ability to enhance equipment and gear. It's a huge reward space. It's the only existing skill pitch right now that currently proposes that we should do that. RS3, we know, has gone down the route of invention. There's potentially thousands of different ways in RS3 that you can augment gear. What do you think about with shamanism, about enhancing existing gear? Is this going to be similar? Are there going to be distinct differences? What are your thoughts?
I think we'll look to keep it probably a bit more low-key than Invention. For starters, Invention touched a huge part of the game, right? For us, this is more of a reward space rather than the identity of the skill itself. That said, augmenting items or, tools or gear scored really high in the survey. It seems that a lot of players like that idea of changing, a tool, or maybe my axe chops faster, or my BCP suddenly defends me better from specific types of damage, for example. It is a really interesting space to touch on, and I think there's a lot of ways we could go with it. There's not a set in stone that it always has to work that way. It's really up to the community, whether you want that at all and what kind of effects you'd like to see as well. I think a big thing as well is how can we visualize this change, right? If I have, a BCP, right, that has changed somehow, it's been augmented or infused with, the power of nature, what does that look like? If I'm in a PvP fight especially, I would want to know if the person I'm fighting has that on them. So maybe the spikes are green now, for example, to indicate that something is different here. I think that visualization would be really important if we go down this route.
There's also so many unknowns when it comes to it. Are they simple stat boosts? +1 strength on a Vandos chestplate? Cool, it's significant, I guess. You would notice it a quarter of the time based on your current boost with a combat part or something. It doesn't feel interesting though, so maybe players would rather we went through the cool, useful passive effects or something, your Bandos chestplate increases your damage with a specific weapon type only, or provides I don't know, some other bonus that we haven't decided. I mean, you mentioned like an axe to cut faster. Already examples of enhancing equipment. You looked at things like these, what's it called, the smoldering axe, whatever, smoldering stone?
Yeah.
Infernal axe, that's the word. You know, you look at things like that for inspiration, perhaps. I think there's a level of how much personalization can you have, right? Are these untradeable so that it's like, cool, I need to get a high level in shamanism to get this benefit and perk? Kind of feels like it's a necessity to train the skill, but it's also a cool reward space for players, you know, like, it's that weird one where like, should you have, I can smith something to increase my armor, or should it not be? Because then you run into like potentially the overload problem from RuneScape 3, right? Where Herblore becomes a mandatory stat to do any sort of like raiding content. It's definitely that there's all these questions we'd like to pose to the community. I like the idea personally that they're kind of tradable in a way. You know, it's a production skill at the end of the day that's trying to sell things, you know, or have things that are useful. And throughout the lifetime of a production skill, like, I guess if anyone's been an Iron Man that does that, the amount of potions you make from 1 to 99, you have so many you can almost never use, right? So a production skill almost by its nature will have things that you maybe all can't use yourself. You want to sell to other players so they can use. And that's quite an exciting thing for a new skill, right? Anyone who's seen the birth of a new game mode like Deadman, you're the first guy that can make, you know, sourdough and brews. You can charge an arm and a leg for them, right? So I think there's all these sort of interesting things that come with it. But again, completely up in the air, the types of effects, the tradable. Is it limited to certain things that you can enhance?
Is it permanent or temporary, right?
Yeah.
Like maybe it's just like an oil that you put on the gear and eventually that just wears off and you have to reapply it, right? Or maybe it is a temporary thing. I mean, we don't know yet.
The temporary thing definitely solves a lot of like, I like the rigor problem, right? Once you've got it and unlocked it, it eventually comes down in price. But if it's a constant consumable, players might think, oh, like, I don't want to have to keep buying this thing to keep doing content, but like you always buy super combat pods to do combat. Like the consumable stuff can be really good from a production skill. It can help the economy, can help the price stay relevant. So I don't know. Maybe there's different types of enhancements that are all behave slightly different ways. I don't know. But it's a really interesting and, as you've mentioned, potentially controversial reward space, but one that we believe resonates well with our players and one that has been desired to come from some sort of production skill.
There's no doubt we need to get it right. It's a harder one to get right, but I think there is a space there for this. I think the kind of key thing is, I believe it would be good for the game, and I believe a lot of the community think this way as well, is that they would like the skill, or a new skill, or current existing skills to be more useful, more rewarding in terms of your equipment and gear and whatever you're using, whether that's combat or skilling as well. Like, a lot of it comes from PVM, right? So it's just, you just buy it on the Grand Exchange, you're good to go. The flip argument of this is like, hey, if I want to have the best in slot gear now, I'm going to need this level and this skill. And it's like, does that indirectly make shamanism a requirement to be doing the best damage in PVM and so on? And that's one of the potential challenges. Though, to some degree, that is already the case, you know? It's not like we've got players running around the game with T-bows and top-end gear. Obviously there are some, but you still want to get a pair of Barrow's gloves. That's got a lot of requirements associated with it. There's a lot of quest lines you're going to want to complete. If you want to get that stuff, like if you want to go and complete Corrupted Gauntlet and get a Bofa or whatever, you need to have done Song of the Elves. That's got a lot of requirements on it. So like skill requirements are already there in terms of getting access to at least some gear. So I'm not sure it's necessarily a problem in this case either, but I think we need to be really considered with like what levels we put things behind, how inaccessible or accessible some stuff is. Is some stuff tradable? Particularly if stuff's untradable, it's maybe a more harder requirement. There's lots to think about, but we want to get this balance right and make sure that it's not seen as a burden to players getting the gear they want to use, I think.
And to not feel like a broken record, but like, this whole conversation has jumped the gun on refinement a little bit, right? Obviously, we still need to know, do players want shamanism? Do they like the idea of the skill? Even ignoring all this enhancing stuff, do you like the thematics? Do you like the direction? Do you want a gathering production skill? Do you want to access the spirit realm? All this stuff. All this enhancing equipment stuff could just be gone. Players don't like it, cool, doesn't exist.
Yeah, let's do the rest of the skill without it, right? That's perfectly fine.
Or implement something else the players have suggested that they really like instead.
Yeah.
That's what refinement is all about, to getting that right and knowing that should this skill move into development, what stuff do they want to see us develop, right? So while we've done a lot of digging into this skill to go, cool, what could it look like? How could this affect? What problems could they solve? We're just doing our due diligence in making sure that those are things that we thought about. But I guess excited to see what the community thinks in like 3 weeks or whatever.
Well, right now, if you're watching.
Right now.
Yeah, tell us in chat.
Can I just peer into the comment section now and like read them ahead of time?
Use your third eye.
Third eye. Access the spirit comment section.
Looking into the future. I think you both made great points. To Kieran's point, I'm hoping that we've made or thought about making the skill enjoyable enough to train that it wouldn't feel so bad if you do kind of need to train it.
Quite.
The spirit realm should add that layer of enjoyment, which we know is super important to get right. But exactly to Husky's point, if this is a part of the pitch that does not resonate with the community, it doesn't have to be part of the pitch. We can change that up. We just need to know if we're heading down the right route and what your thoughts are. So let's talk a bit more about the plan to make it a non-buyable skill. Just talking about why that decision was made. Elena, you touched on it a little bit briefly, but could you just reiterate about why we chose to incorporate gathering into the skill and what that specifically means, making it non-buyable?
Sure. So production skills in the game currently are very much buyable. You buy the core resource, and then training the skill is just producing that into something. Take smithing, for example. You buy the ores, and then you smith them. Sometimes you buy the bars, actually, and then smith them. But whichever you do, you can just buy it. With this, we wanted to avoid that step of the rich people, essentially just training it faster than everyone else.
The oil barons of Gillinor.
Yeah, exactly.
Getting 99 first.
We wanted it to feel like anyone could achieve 99 first, right? Or the most dedicated people. But it's not just about the race as well. Obviously, a lot of players said we don't want it to be viable. And so that's why we wanted the gathering part as well to be sort of untradeable. Maybe not all resources. I think there's still merit in having some that could be tradable, so that, you know, you can make money that way. But the majority and the biggest part of it should be untradeable to make sure that people can't just buy XP.
Great explanation. And I know that early designs sort of thought about an item sink. Do you guys want to talk about that a bit more? Like what kind of item sink it would have been, whether this could be something that we see moving into the skill?
So a big thing we thought about is like, God, everyone loves item sinks, right? How cool wouldn't it be if this skill had one? The problem is that kind of conflicts with being buyable. So we can't have it non-buyable and have the huge item sink as well. Because if it's non-buyable, it means you gather the resources yourself. And so, yeah, naturally you get rid of those yourself, but it doesn't get rid of anything beyond what you gathered. And if it did, then it would have been buyable. So it's kind of, it doesn't work too well together. And that is where the idea of tying an item sink to the reward space comes in. So we don't want to tie it to XP, right? We don't want to have the skill be buyable to train, but could the rewards be more so buyable, right? Say that the best thing you could produce in shamanism was made by tradable components, but it didn't give you the best XP. The best XP would be creating something else. But the best reward, like the best utility purpose, was tradable. Then that would mean that we could have an item sink. We could have those components come from an item sink, is what I'm trying to say. So as an example, purely example at this point, let's say you could break down what item should we choose? Torva plate body, right? Into ancient components, for example, or ancient dust. And it would be like 100 dust or something. And then that could turn into maybe like 100 of this utility item through shamanism. Now, you probably don't want to break down a Torva plate body because those are really expensive. But if the product is worth it, then it is a good item sync, is what I'm trying to say.
And it doesn't necessarily need to give a ton of XP, because the point is that you've unlocked a shamanism level to make this thing, right?
Exactly. And its purpose, like the utility purpose of the product, is worth the investment.
I think that's the problem, right? This whole discussion is people are going to be thinking Invention from RuneScape. And the reason it worked is because the best item sync in the world ended up being turning items that existed in the world into XP. As you mentioned, that's a buyable directly. It was a phenomenal item sync on a global scale for a lot of useless items. And as soon as you lose that, it's hard you have to go to specifics, right?
Yeah.
I think as well, the whole like gathering production versus like in one skill is something that's come up a lot in relation to this, because we could just say, hey, like it's non-buyable, so you still need to go out and get it. But things like, we use the example of like bark, berries, roots. These are actually kind of things that exist in the game. So you might think, well, what if I just farm the berries, or, you know, dig up a tree I've cut for the roots? I want to point, first of all, these examples of berries, roots are probably not going to be this. We thought it was just very clear and match the thematic. But you think about what the day one experience for a player looks like suddenly training this skill. They can't buy them, so they need to go out and get these berries, these roots, whatever. So day one of Shamanism launch, I'm going to go plant a tree with farming, or plant a bush with farming, or cut a tree with wood cutting. And it's suddenly not a very exciting skill to go and train when the first thing you do is do something that you already do, or perhaps you've already done. Like, I think that's come up a lot with some of our skills and feedback is, I don't want the first step in this to be training wood cutting when I'm already done. And done doesn't necessarily mean 99. It could be I've accomplished all the wood cutting goals I want to do in my account, right? So that's why having a new gathering method to get people excited, doing new content from the get-go, sort of like makes sense to have this as a gathering production skill hybrid. And as you've mentioned, having it be some parts tradable to make money could work. Just make sure we distance that from XP. It doesn't need to be completely untradeable.
Awesome, fantastic responses. We've sort of covered it, but I just do want to ask a general question about how do you feel the economy is going to work around shamanism? So does it cost a lot of gold to train it, or what are the effects on the economy, do you imagine, should it pass through?
So ideally it wouldn't cost much at all. Like we said, we don't want it to be buyable. So you'd go out and get the resources yourself for the most part. I think some elements could be tradable, right? Some of those resources. And we'd look to tie that more towards the reward space. So if you want the strong utility items, yeah, maybe you just buy the resources. Or you gather them yourself, but maybe they're harder to get as well. That's all about balancing, right?
One of the ideas that we quite liked from shamanism was the idea that you can, say, forage components from creatures, right? The idea of having like a carving knife or something. We mentioned a hellhound claw. Maybe you've trained shamanism for a bit. You're not like pushing for 99. Maybe you got to like 40, 50 shamanism and you're done. Cool, I played the new content. Kind of want to go back to Slayer. But now I've got the ability to harvest this new resource from maybe a Slayer creature like a hellhound. So there can definitely be elements of, well, from a gameplay perspective, it kind of makes sense for that to be tradable, because there's also the byproduct of hellhounds are a rather undesirable task that doesn't drop much, so let's give them a way to make money from that task. That enhances that existing activity.
Very cool.
So then players who are selling this, obviously we don't want this to be like a massive way to get XP by using a bunch of hellhound horns or claws or whatever it is that you're carving from this creature, right? But there can still be money-making opportunities using placeholder numbers. Some shamanism person who is higher level than you can make use of this claw that you carve, but they can use, can combine this with some other stuff that they've earned. So they'll buy the claw from you for 20k, use it to the other stuff that they've already gathered and turn it into something worth 60k, and you're happy. You made 20k from harvesting this hellhound, right? Which, placeholder numbers, don't freak out. It's not something going to be a ton of money from hellhound tasks, I'm sure. But they've made a flip on it because they had the expertise and the skill. And I think that's part of the charm of production skills, and always has been, is having someone with the specialist knowledge to make something. Now, obviously, as the skill moves on, more people will be at this level. Everyone can make it. It's the meme that cut gems are actually worth less than uncut gems. But like, obviously, cut gems have less purpose. They're literally making jewelry. It all depends on what the reward space looks like. Is it still worth making that, even though everyone can make it? And I think also the untradable part from gathering helps that, because maybe the value in making that thing comes from the time invested in the untradeable stuff, similar to how Prif crystals are valuable because they're untradeable. You need to go do the content to get them, right? So there's a lot of tie-ins to existing, like examples in existing content that you can kind of see it. Again, this is a whole dive into what ifs and theoreticals, and once it gets in, and refinement, and add one to the counter. But you know, like I think these are examples of how we think it could work. You know.
Awesome, fantastic response. I think we've about covered most of the shamanism questions, so I just want to ask one final question about shamanism. What are you most excited for when you think about shamanism?
It has to be the spirit realm, honestly. The
Spirit
idea
realm
of
for me as well.
Yeah, it's just really exciting. What about you?
I kind of feel like it's spirit realm as well. I don't want to be like, oh, we all just said the spirit realm. That's exciting.
I have a different answer.
Yeah.
I think that I'm curious to see the sort of like, I guess the reward space is still really interesting. Like we're selling this as a production skill, gathering production skill, but fundamentally all the things you want to know. I kind of want to know, how is a tiki different from a totem, different from this? I mean, we even explored internally, like what if one of these is a new equipable item, right? That's an interesting reward space, like a new equipment slot. Hold this tiki or something. I don't know. I know people are probably going to go, oh my God, they're introducing Runescape auras and passive buffs. Doesn't necessarily have to be that way, you know? Just thinking of like other ways this reward space could interact with. So, because I think that has to hold up primarily at its core. And we can't just have, the production stuff's whatever, but the spirit realm's cool, because I think that's not the identity of the skill for me. So
For sure.
I think I'm still excited in trying to make that as interesting as possible and coming up with a bunch of cool things that interact with the game world in different ways.
I will say one more thing, actually. Sorry, I'm kind of cheating the question a bit, but I always loved gathering in the game, like ever since I was a kid. For some weird reason, my favorite skill as a kid was mining. Like, who likes mining? It's weird. But what I really enjoyed was like getting all these ores and seeing my bank value go up. And especially when I got a gem and heard that like sound, that was really satisfying to me. So I really love just resource gathering, essentially. And so that's an aspect that I think could feel really satisfying in shamanism. It's also really cool to like finally get to use those, right? Like you feel good about all the stuff you've gathered and now you get to use it. It's quite similar to archaeology, in fact, in Runescape. Like their gameplay loop is you go somewhere, you start digging, you get a bunch of resources, and then ultimately you try to, refine something you dug up. I don't recall the word for it, but it's very similar, like gathering and production as well. So we've drawn a bit of inspiration from there. But yeah.
I think that's actually an underappreciated benefit of this skill is actually just having another gathering skill that feels meaningful to train.
Yeah.
I'm with you, fishing was my favorite skill, but right now on my account, it feels like it's pointless to keep fishing. I mean, I'm sure if I wasn't an iron account, it would be, I could sell the fish at least, but it definitely feels nice to just have something. And I think this is a skill that has the potential for a lot more interactivity in different things. I don't know what AFK sailing looks like. I know we've spoken about like, hey, we want different ways to train it, whether they're more intensive or not. I don't think AFK sailing really potentially exists, but I could imagine AFK ways of gathering through shamanism, and I think that's an appeal that this pitch has that some of the others might not.
Awesome answers, guys. I have to agree with the gathering side of things. I mean, if flax picking was a skill, I'd be 99 because I just find it so satisfying as well. For me, I'm most excited about reading the feedback on the enhancing gear side of things. I really want to know what players are going to say. So future me will be watching the Twitch chat very closely to hear your opinions.
I just think on this gathering thing, like it's 2023 now. We've learned an awful lot as players over the last 20 years of RuneScape. And what's the most recent gathering skill? It's ancient, right? It's going way back for old schools, particularly. We can do something way more impressive than what's present in fishing, mining, woodcutting, and so on. Like, I can't wait to see what exactly we can come up with there. I'm imagining different types of resource would have slightly different gathering methods and so on. We can be really creative with that and make gathering actually quite interesting mechanically as well. I'm totally imagining more intensive methods and less intensive methods. just like there kind of is already in some of those skills. So yeah, super excited, because I believe with the power of hindsight and what we've learned as game designers as well, we could do something way better.
Look at what we're trying to do with forestry, for example, right? That's a revamp of a gathering skill. And I'm sure we can take, some parts of that, whatever works with forestry, use it in shamanism as well.
Fantastic answers, guys. I really appreciate your time coming here to speak with the community on the roundtable. After hearing everything, I honestly just want all three. So I imagine it's going to be really hard for the community. But that about wraps up all of our questions for today. If you're watching this live, we might be heading into a live Q&A. If not, we will be doing one shortly afterwards, where we will answer even more of your questions once the skill pitches go live. If you are watching this on YouTube, hit that like button, subscribe. All the information is going to be linked below. So make sure to take a read of the blog if you can. Check out our other videos and you'll find out more about each of the pitches. We're going to be keeping a very close eye on feedback throughout the next few weeks, basically. We plan to run a poll to decide which of these skills does move into refinement. So please do keep an eye on our relevant social media channels. We'll be keeping you closely updated through there, as well as on our dedicated new skill Discord. We'll be sharing smaller, more frequent updates in the Discord, and it will be more active now that the skill pitches are out. Remember that the server is open for everyone to join. It's just that only a few will be able to speak directly. So we'll be hosting discussions on there as well. We'd like to thank everyone for watching, especially if you made it through the whole of this stream or video. We really appreciate it. We hope we've been able to answer some of the questions that you may have. We're just preempting the questions that you might have following the skill pitches. So make sure to check out the videos, the blogs, and leave your feedback. Does anyone want to say anything before we round off?
Make sure to vote. I think that's the biggest thing, right? Vote for your favorite, and hope you enjoyed this.
Yep. And good luck for the Q&A, guys, I suppose. I don't hate you all because I'm not there. I'm taking a well-deserved break, honeymoon away, going to Japan. So I don't hate everyone, but I look forward to seeing it all when I come back and seeing what situation all the pitches are in. And just remember, we don't want to end up... we don't want no skill to happen because everyone's in camps fighting with each other. So I guess it's, even if your favorite skill is not the one that's selected for refinement, I hope that the community as a whole is supportive to help still make it the best skill regardless. Because I think we all know that a lot of players want a new skill in the game, so.
Yeah. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Thank you for all the feedback you've given us so far in consultation and on the pitches at this point. And keep it coming, because that is what's going to form this skill and help us make it the best it can be, whichever one of the three win. We believe all three are strong. We believe all three can deliver an awesome, essentially an expansion to the game and what it offers. So we're happy whichever wins. You vote, tell us, give us that input. We can't wait to see which wins.
Do you want to say refinement before we go, or thematic?
Refinement. Thematic. I don't know. Help us, give us feedback, as everyone said. Help us design the skill for the community by the community, and help us hold us to that dream.
Should we stare awkwardly into the camera? Bye.
Make sure to vote.